and welcome to our virtual event, Digital and Accelerator to Construction. Today we'll be hearing from a panel of experts on how digital technology is an accelerator in construction and how you can embrace these new technologies and digital tools to increase efficiency. If you'd like to ask a question, please scroll down to the Slido tab. At 1 p.m, we'll be holding the live Q&A session with our panel members. This is where I will pose those questions. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker. Carl Pallister is the Quality Manager at Sapphire Balconies.
Welcome, Carl. I'm glad to have you joining today. Could you start off just giving us a bit of a background before we dive into digital tools and what we're looking at in this particular interview? Could you just give us a little bit of a background behind yourself and who you are?
Sure, thanks, Nick. So, as far as I'm concerned, I've spent about 20 years, I suppose, almost 20 years in the automotive industry before I joined Sapphire. The automotive industry was very, very interesting because it's a totally different concept, if you like, to the construction industry. So that difference was quite stark between the auto industry and the construction industry. So in the automotive industry, we were dealing with particularly high-end areas. We were supplying products into the F1, the racing industry. So things had to be top-notch, had to be really, really good. And the interesting thing about the automotive industry was the emphasis, if you like, on timely delivery, 100% quality, and that sort of thing, which is really very important. There's nothing like the focus of mind, if you like, knowing that some parts that you're delivering to a factory, and knowing that there's an £80,000 an hour shutdown fee on that factory. So, getting products to the top quality, getting products on time onto the factory floor, it really did focus your mind. So, I brought that across to Sapphire, that background. I think it is quite key, actually, that traceability and digital control of quality, I think, is vitally important. I don't know if that gives you a little bit of a background. I've been at Sapphire for 6 years now, beg your pardon. So there's been a good chance of implementing some of this stuff over the 6 years. So that gives you a little bit of input.
That's really helpful, thanks, Bill. Now, I'm very aware of the fact that you're a believer in the benefits of digital traceability and so on. Explain to the audience why that's important.
Okay, so first and foremost, I suppose the key part is is keeping records of compliance. Construction Week seminar around about this time last year, I can't remember exactly when it was, but there was a comment there that really resonated with me, and that was, I can't really remember the speaker, but he said, as an industry, we're hopeless at keeping records. And it was particularly in relation to Grenfell and that sort of thing. So, and it's about those records that, as an industry, we kind of do it, file it, and at some point, those files in a transitional workforce, those files just get lost. They go back with the porter cabins, and those files just get lost. They just get disposed of. Who knows where they've gone? That's one of the key things. So having that digital and having that backed up, stored on some sort of digital vault somewhere, means that you can maintain that traceability. The second point I've raised here is the visibility of that information. It's vital information. I think if we just use those quality records purely as compliance only, we're missing out a huge amount of the value of those records. Those records actually show visibility of the progress through the job. And I think that's quite a key point. So being able to use those records, so you can say, okay, we've done that record. So that then suggests that we are a certain way through the progress of the job. I think that's a key point. Drawing on the experience of Formula One, I think is actually quite interesting. If you visualize a racing car going around the track, you know, those cars are fitted out with sensors everywhere, you know, which are recording G-force and tire wear and engine speeds and all that sort of thing. You know, the steering wheel on an F1 car is worth an absolute fortune, and that's because of all the sensors there are and stuff, and all built in. What I'm bringing out here is, what is the point of all that? Those sensors and that sort of stuff are providing real-time data back to pit stop, just to say, so the race bosses can watch that car and say, okay, looks like we've got a bit of excessive tyre wear here. Let's bring the pit stop forward to 2 laps. Okay, come on, call the driver, pull into it 2 laps early, do a pit stop, off they go again. But it's that real-time data and correction of their strategy as they go that gives the winning edge. And I think that's a key point that we can draw on, if you like, for the digital traceability side of things. So having that efficiency, because that data is just coming in regularly, it's real time, you get that chance of an early intervention of something going wrong. Third point is the typical difficulties, if you like, of paper records on site. We all know what it's like. You go out there with a clipboard, the heavens open and it dumps down with rain. You've suddenly got very wet records. You've got to dry out the radiator. It all goes all crinkly and everything else. Yeah. How many checklists have you seen that have just got stuff down the back of a filing cabinet somewhere? They've gone. They're missing. Where have they gone? Who knows? They're built in. There's somewhere down inside the cavity because it's got dropped. So you get the idea. It's the difficulties, if you like, on site of using paper records that nobody ever looks at. I think that kind of brings its own story.
Yeah, so what you touch on there with data that you're kind of alluding to is the fact that with the knowledge, you can do something about things. Without it, there's not the option to actually deal with an issue. Issues are obviously quite a major thing in construction site. If there's not been an issue on a site, it's probably because the site hasn't actually started yet. But in a scenario where you have something going, something which is got slightly off the track, you've got some form of an issue, whatever that is, how can digital help in that process?
So digital can help. First of all, if you have tracked a lot of things via a digital method, well, let's go back to, if you like, traceability in its rawest form. And what's the point of having the traceability? Traceability is about identifying the product, so identifying the batch, identifying all that sort of thing. So you say, okay, we have a batch. We've got a rogue employee. We'll call him John. He's done a very, very poor weld somewhere along the line. Okay, so now you need to identify everything that John has worked on since you last checked up on him. So you've got to be able to identify all that. Now, if you've got paper records, it means trawling through paper records and trying to find out everything that he's done, find out where that's all got to, and try and get that recall in place. Now, that's vitally important, because if you've got a faulty weld that's somewhere on the building, that is highly dangerous, because you're talking about structural steelwork, So we've got to make sure that everything is identified. So having that digital record means that you can slice and dice the data. You've got, computer records, if you like, which you can just go straight into and say, right there. That's, and being able to identify everything that John has produced in the last 2 months, let's say. Right, let's go back 2 months. So everything he's produced in the last 2 months, I need to be able to identify it. I know exactly how many pieces of steelwork he's done, I need to know exactly where those pieces of steel are in the country or overseas or wherever they are. I need to be able to identify those, and I need to be able to go to that place and actually physically see those items of steelwork and be able to account for every single one. Because you talk about life and death matter in this particular situation. So in the retail industry, for example, Nick, we've got the situation where you often see recall notices up in supermarkets.
Yeah, and
the reason for that is because they can't identify where everything's got to. So the nearest guess, if you like, is that, well, we'll just publicise it, do all these best efforts, we'll put adverts in the paper, we'll put signs up in the supermarkets. If they get 20% of that back, they're doing pretty well. Well, that's not good enough in a safety critical situation. So this is why I see this is digital traceability assists with this process. Don't know, does that make it clear, Nick, or do you need a bit more?
That's helpful. And I think probably the other thing, just as you're thinking, speaking there, just thinking out loud really, but there's probably a bit of a scenario as well, and the fact that the likelihood of that issue being picked up earlier is probably much better from a digital point of view, where you can have continual reports and so on tracking that, rather than really the paper systems and so on are probably more likely to be checked at the end of a period or the end of a site or whatever that is, where actually it's already happened. It's happened loads of times. I know having been around some car production facilities in the past, I know things get stopped and get sorted, but the whole thing's monitored as well on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that's an important point, actually. So being able to monitor in real time, again, going back to pit stop analogy, if you like, in Formula One, it's being able to identify, if you like, almost in real time. And ideally, if the digital tools can actually identify an issue by itself using whatever controls you've got in place, maybe a sort of failure of a check, or you might even use AI for that sort of thing, artificial intelligence, to actually scan through a form, if you like, a digital form, and say, okay, there's a problem here. Be able to identify those problems really early, at the moment, within minutes of it actually occurring. Be able to identify that means you don't have a whole load of rework to go back over and look at. You can't do that with paper. Because you might have all the paper records, but who's actually looking over those paper records?
Yeah, that leads us on quite nicely to moving slightly away from paper, but we've obviously got a system called Passport, Balcony Passport. What is that? And explain the name, where the name comes from and why we've called it that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So Passport, I suppose, let's just go a little sidestep, if you like, into Passport and what it does, because I guess some of the audience will have never heard of Passport, which is fair enough. So Passport is our digital traceability app that we've got. So it's built up on Android. I think we've got a iOS version coming out shortly. It's a centralized database of all the balconies, all the steelwork, all the production that we control. And the way it works is it works on the basis of let's pick a balcony, okay? So it's a similar process for steelwork and similar process for the other products we produce. But let's just pick a balcony. So a balcony, for example, goes through several phases of its life cycle. So it goes through assembly. So there's various parts of assembly. And when you're creating a balcony, so what we do is we put a frame together, then we put soffits on, then we put decking on. Now, once you've got the soffits and decking on, you can't see inside. So it's important to actually have those checks on the frame done before the decking goes on. So there's, if you like, there's multiple stages through the assembly process that we say, right, you've got to have a stop point. Once a frame's built, you've got to have a stop point. You've got to do some checks. So what we do is we have a checklist on the app. We look up that balcony serial number. You go through, you go down the checklist. And you say, yeah, it's all okay. All the bolts are tightened up. You got, splash of paint on the bolts just to show that, the torque's done. the talks are okay and that sort of thing. So there's various checks. Take a photo, all stored digitally, hit submit. So there you go. There's your first record.
That is where the passport concept comes in, isn't it? And the fact that you've got
accountability.
Yeah, and the fact that you've got checks where you can't actually move to the next bit unless it's actually been signed off, and you've got that stage by stage restriction.
That's the key point. So there is a sequence through the whole balcony assembly process. So, for example, you can't do decking checks if the frame check hasn't been done. So it kind of enforces you've got to have done those frame checks before you get the decking checks done. So yeah, you go through the whole process. You move through the process. On there is the delivery to site checks. So you've got to look for some damage when it arrives on site. When it's installed, there's further checks to be done on that same balcony. When it's handed over to the main contractor, again, there's checks to be done. There's photos to be taken. So you end up with a complete logbook, I suppose, of all the checks that have been carried out on that particular balcony. We could have called it logbook, but we called it passport. I think the reason for that is really it's bringing that accountability into each step, if you like. The further side to this, Nick, which I think is actually quite important to draw out of here, is the fact that each one of those checks is valuable in itself.
Yeah.
It brings that compliance side of things. So you've got all of those, and you can guarantee that you've got all of those checks because of the sequential nature of them. You can't hand over to the main contractor until all the preceding checks have been done. You can't, so it enforces all of those checks all the way through the process. So that's one key point, is enforcing the compliance. The other point of that is having a dashboard that you can see anywhere in the world. You can look at the dashboard and say, I know where that balcony is in production sequence. The frame check has been done, so I know by looking at this dashboard that frame check has been submitted. So I know that frame is in existence, and I can see a photo of it. And then you say, well, I know that balcony is on site because I've just seen the delivery report. So it brings that visibility, if you like. And there's nothing special about it. All it runs off is submission of those checklists. Once that checklist is submitted, you know definitively, because you've got a signature and you've got a photo, that is the stage that balcony has got to. So it's having that visibility. It drives the visibility, and that's the power of it.
So one of the, in summary, on the paper side of things, one of the disadvantages of paper is obviously the fact that it can spoil. But quite apart from that, there is the possibility that even if you've got a stage checklist in paper, somebody could go through the whole lot of that and actually just tick it off all at the end. And that's really works against the whole principle of having this flow in production, making sure it's controlled, because then you're dealing with an issue when it arises. You're sorting it for further batches rather than having 100 balconies, which you suddenly have got a load of issues on. Or it may not even be balconies. I mean, what we're talking about here is in the context of balconies, but this is generic for the
absolutely
industry, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you could use the same system for bathroom pods. You could use the same system for anything that's kind of modular in a way. A bathroom kit, for example, or a brise soleil, or anything really that comes to site as a completed assembly can be run in this way. So we use balconies, obviously, because that's what we do.
Yeah. So thanks, Carl. Appreciate your thoughts and comments around this. For those of you who want to know a bit more about Passport, there is a Passport video, and you can find it on a video gallery on our website, sapphire.e.com. If you've got any live questions for Carl, please submit them now using Slido, and they'll be answered at the panel discussion a bit later on. Thanks very much for your time, Carl.
Good. Thanks, Nick. Good.
Thank you, Carl. That was a very interesting interview there. And remember, if you want to ask Carl any questions on the panel today, then please scroll down to the Slido app below. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Namirita Bassi. She's the Director at the Marketing Essentials Lab.
Hello, and welcome to this presentation on digital making MMC simpler. So in this presentation, I'm going to try and go through how the construction industry is changing, what the digital future holds, and how the construction industry can embrace digital and make offsite much easier through digitization and digital construction. Before I start, here's a little bit about me. So I have about 8 years experience researching and looking into digitization. And I also have experience working on both industry side and agency side, working with various customers from Tata, Amazon, and many more. I also used to be an associate lecturer at the University of Kent, teaching strategic marketing, but I kind of don't do that anymore. But I used to do that up until Christmas this year, just because of the lack of time. And so in this presentation, we're going to go through the desire for digital in the construction industry. We're going to look at the government drive, the newly launched MMC tool, which was launched at the end of the year, how early supply chain adapters, so from manufacturers such as Sapphire to Parker Steel to Green Blue Urban, how they are using digital to adapt and be more digitized, and how the future can be, what the future holds, joining up tools from white labeling, from configurators to platforms, how digitization can be used in the construction industry. So looking at digitization, there is a greater case for digitization because it improves accountability, improves record keeping, and also it reduces project delays and can enhance the quality of buildings and improve safety, working conditions and environmental compatibility. Modules such as BIM offer a dynamic database, offers large pools of data, allowing you to track the building through design, specification, procurement, construction, quality control, finish, handover. It allows you to have a whole system which can, whole database with all this data that can be used to increase productivity, make efficiency gains, but also it has better, stakeholder collaboration control. So digitization can be just managed throughout the project lifecycle. So it does have advantages. So digitization doesn't only need to be from BIM. It can be from the ability from manufacturers being able to directly talk to architects, systems such as Revit, so to allow design efficiency. Digitization is just not there to, just for the sake of it. It does offer, productivity and commercial benefits. So according to a study by the World Economic Forum, they expect that there'll be a saving of 1.2 trillion in the next 10 years in non-residential construction alone from digitization. But more than just commercial benefits, it also allows for better sustainability tracking because you have access to larger pools of data. You can make better decisions when you have access to so much data, So it allows for better accountability for firms and, driving sustainability in this world. Also, digitization also allows for, in the post-pandemic world, is going to be really important because it allows teams to move quickly and allows teams to be agile. So it allows for remote collaboration. If anything, the pandemic has shown companies their ability to move quickly. So post-pandemic, digitization is going to be even more important, but it's not just going to be on the design side, but it's also going to be on the procurement side because there will be more and more demand for e-commerce models in the construction sector. But all of this is easy on paper. It's not without its challenges. So when it comes to any new technology, human beings, they don't want to adapt so easily to new technologies because adoption can take up time. It's learning new processes. There can be a lack of senior management buy-in. Also, lack of in-house teams with the experience can kind of affect digitization, construction, and the construction industry by and large is the largest industry after, along with agriculture, about 6% GDP, but it's one of the least digitized sectors across the world, across the UK. So it's quite important to kind of look and understand the benefits of it, even though there might be a huge initial cost. In the long run, they do offer benefits. So this is just a chart of digitization adoption. So it is increasing. In 2019, there were about 69% firms that were aware and they were using BIM. But this isn't necessarily just because firms saw the commercial importance. There's also the government drive. BIM is mandatory for government-funded projects. So, but BIM is in general gaining currency as a digital platform that allows design, modeling, better collaboration across the project lifecycle, across all the stakeholders involved. It offers efficiency gains throughout. So it also offers, they kind of looked at what the benefits were. They interviewed firms, they surveyed firms. 75% said that they saw positive returns on investment by using them, shorter life cycles. Also, lower cost in materials, less paperwork. Who doesn't like less paperwork, let's face it. But there's still an issue where it's not being used post-construction. So that's because of, limited relevance or limited budget. Or in general, again, with any digital technology, human factor has to be accounted for. So there's a resistance to change for human beings to kind of look at digitizing their operations. So the government is trying their best. I mean, I don't know if they are trying to kind of drive digitization. So last year, towards the end of the year, I think the Mayor of London launched this pricing tool. So it kind of easily allows builders or project planners to assess the viability of precision manufactured homes. So it's basically open source and you don't have to be an architect to be able to use it. So it embeds London's housing standards and manufacturing rules to allow organizations to rapidly design optimized off-site housing solutions. And the biggest thing with this is it doesn't require specialist knowledge. So you don't have to be an architect, you don't have to have any experience. Well, a little bit of experience, but you don't have to have technical experience in that, in housing. So it basically allows, in practical terms, the app allows the user to plot a building outline on a map, inputting information to the design number of units, and floor height, etc. The app kind of uses its inbuilt logic and optimizes the layout, and then basically shows you if that model kind of works, if it fits. So these are big changes. So this will take a bit of time, but also manufacturers are driving this. So there's the Tekla plugin, by Parker Steel, which allows the structural model that anybody has specified to be quickly transformed into a price quote. So traditional processes no longer, it can take a lot of time. There's a lot of back and forth, there's a lot of email exchanges, and there's a lot of paperwork. So with this, a model can be quickly turned into a price quote. So making it really easy for anyone working on the project in procurement to kind of get that. So Sapphire also has this design tool, which is really quite handy because it lets you specify your balcony efficiently, from finishes to, you know, technical details to, you know, design features, etc., to drainage solutions. It lets you visualize, and then you can import that model straight into your design software that you're using, you know, and also it will help you design a compliant balcony as well, which is quite handy, especially given the current climate. Again, with green blue urban, so usually a lot of trees will be planted that kind of don't grow or don't kind of see, you know, they'll die because they don't have the necessary root management system. So, you know, or, you know, the root management system will grow out of the pavement, actually, you know, causing slips and trips, causing insurance and costly replanting. So green blue urban, when you're putting trees in urban locations, lets you calculate, you know, the correct adequate root management and correct soil volume. So early root growth is redirected below, and which actually allows for a saving cost. So tree stability with design, a tree pit with full product breakdown, you know, you can just get to that in a few kind of clicks. So in terms of digitization, while manufacturers are making progress, there still needs to be quite a bit of work there, you know. So in the future, we see the tools joining, so less design will be required as data can be shared from one platform to the other. So we see, like, you know, it can go from, you know, real estate 0 to kind of the specifying to the buying stage quite seamlessly. So the industry is quite traditional. So with anything that is ordered, it goes through a lot of processes. Equally, we see white labeling. So for home builders, parallels can be drawn from the car industry, with homeowners being able to kind of select their own home finishings, because again, at this process is quite manual, so the customer kind of has to fill out forms and send them through and, you know, sign, etc., whereas this could be quite easily done digitally in the future. But also we see that from configurators, you would also kind of go to platforms where you can kind of specify your price range, etc., and kind of do a concept design from furnishings to the planning process. You know, you can kind of see how it works. So in terms of this digital presentation, we're just going through the benefits of digitization and why the industry kind of needs to digitize. So I'm hoping you can, if you have any questions, do let me know and we can go through them. Thank you so much for attending this digital presentation. I usually do this in a live setting, so it's a bit disconcerting talking to the camera, but I hope this presentation was okay. Thank you so much for joining us, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation there. Again, if you have any questions, then please do scroll down to the Slido below. I'd now like to introduce Andrew Gamblin. Andrew is a digital manager at Wilmot Dixon.
Welcome, Andrew. I'm glad to have you here today. I'm quite excited to hear a bit about what Wilmot Dixon are doing and leading the industry in the BIM conversation. But do you mind just starting off introducing to the audience who you are and your role at Wilmot Dixon?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Andrew Gamblin. I'm a digital manager for Wilmot Dixon Synesis. And my role is to implement BIM and digital construction, new technologies, new processes, new hardware within the business to make the design, construction and handover phases as streamlined as physically possible.
Good, thanks. So one of the areas we're aware that who oversees the BIM implementation and so on. Now, talk us through how that works. And do you pitch that to your internal colleagues, or is that a conversation you're leading to your clients? How does that work for the industry?
So obviously, as everyone knows, BIM is sort of underpinned by a number of different standards. Up until beginning of last year, it was the PAS 1192 or PAS 1192 suite of documentation. Now it's the ISO 19650, and they're very thorough standards which give you an understanding of the promotion of collaboration, how you should work with workflows and processes, and it gives you some quite good technical data. But the one thing that we have noticed is that in reality, BIM is very people focused. It is a process, yes, but it's a process that can only function correctly if the people who are utilizing it and are working with it on the project understand it and want to work with BIM as a whole. So a lot of my role, particularly at the early stages of a project, whether it be looking through tender documentation, or if we're lucky enough to be engaged by a framework project at a very, very early stage of a project, as in Reba Stage 0, Reba Stage 1. A lot of my role is actually trying to get people on board with the idea of BIM and the idea of working in a collaborative environment to ensure the project flows smoothly. A lot of people are still under the impression that BIM is a 3D model, that it is something visual that you can see and you can play around with, and it's software led, and it's Autodesk or it's Trimble or it's ArchiCAD or any of these different pieces of software. The cold reality is that BIM is not that. BIM is a process. It's a process which is heavily reliant on people. And the way that you get the best out of that process is by having the people on board and by having the software aiding that journey, the design journey and the construction journey and the handover journey. If you focus too much on the software, you will end up having no benefits, nothing that's there. So, yeah, it can be quite a difficult job, I will admit, but there's definitely a lot of benefits that you can kind of showcase to people that are quite easy and simple for them to understand. And probably the easiest one is the visualization. It's the communication aspect that you have by using the BIM process. It can be very powerful.
If there's such a thing as an ideal world, especially in these kind of challenging times, what does the ideal implementation of BIM look like, do you think, from a practical aspect and that collaboration?
So from a practical aspect, the most critical element to it is the client, the customer, the end user, the person who's going to be utilizing the building, defining at the beginning of the project what it is that they want and what they want to have for their particular asset or the development that they're commissioning to be built. If they can define clearly that they want to have information about maintainable assets, that they want to be able to they want to be able to use computer aided facilities management software for planned preventative maintenance. It's a huge help, massive help, because number one, it shows that they are wanting to engage with the technology and the process to get their outcomes that they want, is the first thing. The second thing is that it means that for the supply chain, and that includes tier 1 contractors as well as tier 2, tier 3 and consultants as well, it clearly defines to them what it is they need to produce. So one of the big issues on a lot of BIM projects at the moment is that people are still either going down the route of saying they want everything, or they're not clear with what it is that they want. And that forms a lot of rework. It means that you can't necessarily set up the models in the correct way. So if you have a well-informed client and end user, then they can significantly shape the implementation of BIM on a project level. So clear definition of what they want means that people can clearly respond back with what they will provide and how they will provide it and when they will provide it. And that means that everyone understands what needs to be reduced along the process, so that you're not wasting time creating information that you don't need to create. So that is probably the best implementation that I can see for a BIM project, is to be at the very beginning, the client and the end user to be very clear with what it is that they want.
So from a contractor's perspective, how much do you involve your supply chain in this collaboration piece? The product manufacturers, the consultants working the scheme as well. How much involvement does everyone have with that model?
Significantly, or a significant amount of interaction. So we have a set of preferred supply chain as well as preferred suppliers that we work with. The reason being that we know from a manufacturer's perspective, we understand their products. It means that they can provide us with great service to understand the details and what kind of details we need to provide to ensure, the best warranties and no leaking and no issues with further on. And from a supply chain's point of view, it means that they understand how we work as a business, what it is that we need from a health and safety perspective, what we need from a preliminary perspective, and what we need from a design perspective. So we try to bring them on board as soon as we can within the process to provide us with specialist knowledge at an early stage. So any design development that takes place is taking place cognizant of what needs to happen during construction. And obviously the product manufacturers come on board in that sense as well. And we spend a lot of time working with the supply chain who have design requirements to make sure they understand what it is they need to provide in a digital sense to us, and how we can support them through the BIM process. And one of the big things that's being rolled out is an initiative known as Collaboration is Our Norm, or is the norm, which basically means that we have a series of long-term, medium-term, and short-term planning sessions with all the required parties. So that includes the client, the consultants, our own internal people from the different disciplines internally, as well as supply chain, to come up with a program which is correct and has been decided with everyone's input. And we found in a number of scenarios the combination of having a project that's utilized the BIM processes and has 3D visuals that are correct and accurate, combined with these collaborative planning sessions, means that people understand the complexities of what it is that's being what's trying to be done, and they've got the ability to visualize and see what it is they need to do to make the project work as well as it possibly can.
So let's go a bit of insight there. In terms of how this works in a practical example, have you got any projects which you can tell us about as a bit of a case study on how you may have implemented this process?
Yeah. So we had a hospital project in South London. It was around about a 4,500 square meter project, primary care unit in as I said, in South London. And it was a project where I think a couple of the first couple of meetings that I had, it was BIM level 2 as it was known then. Now it's stage maturity 2, I think it is, or maturity stage 2. I can't remember which way around it is. And it was quite difficult to begin with, because it wasn't clear what was wanted in terms of the BIM process. It was very much we want everything, and it was trying to refine that down to understand what everything means. So we managed to work with everyone, with the consultants as well as the customer, to define what everything meant. And we started modeling and producing information, and it was working very, very well. At one particular point, for example, we had what's known as an inception workshop. So just before we're about to hit site, we have a sort of an internal meeting which encompasses the consultants as well as the customers and our own internal people to kind of showcase what it is that we're building, and for us to understand better what it is that the customer wants and why this project is special for them. And at that particular time, there was a a lady from what's known as a CCG, so a community care group, who'd been sort of spearheading the charge of this project for probably 6 or 7 years prior to this. And she was very invested in this project, very invested. And my colleague hadn't mentioned to anyone that I was going to be turning up, and I turned up with a virtual reality headset. And I sort of came on just before a break, and I basically said to the people, you know, I'm listening to what's been going on in this meeting so far. Everything is all about communication and people trying to understand how the design is working and what's working with it. And I basically said I'd like to invite whoever wants to come up here, go in the virtual reality headset, just to be able to have a walk around the building. At which point there was a couple of murmurs, and this particular lady from the CCG, she came up and she said, "I want to have a go." So put her in the headset, gave her 30 seconds of understanding how you walk around in the virtual reality, and she went off straight to this particular part of the primary care, which is to do with dialysis, to stand where a nurse would stand, to understand what their view would be whilst they're working, because she'd only ever seen 2D drawings, and she'd never had any understanding of what the space would look like or what their view would look like. So the first thing she did was she went straight there to the nurse's station, looked to the left, looked to the right, and went, "Oh, thank God for that. They can actually see what they need to see." And that was the first time that she'd been able to do that. The first time that she'd been able to properly visualize what that space would look like, how big it was, what the sight lines were. And that's something that had never been there before. And you would not be able to achieve on a non-BIM project, because, okay, you might be able to produce a 3D model, but there's no guarantee that that 3D model on a non-BIM project is up to date and correct of what the latest stage of design is. So, if it wasn't BIM, it could be the wrong sight lines, the wrong height walls, the wrong positions of various different things. So that was great. And we had other instances as well where we did a lot of engagement sessions with the local community and the end users to show them the design, to make sure they were happy with it and how it was working. And in one particular instance, we've done a high quality visual render of the building and a walkthrough. And someone pointed out that the handrail system that was being utilized at the first floor in the atrium and the reception was in a design, or was designed in such a way that could trigger someone with mental illness. So it has to be changed. Now, this was before any work on site had been done. I think the foundations had just been in place and we were just working on the structural frame at that point in time. And that basically prompted us to make a design change, working in collaboration with the customer and the rest of the design team, to something which was that had no ability to trigger someone. And so you can imagine the cost savings involved there from both our point of view as well as the customer's point of view. We made the modification at an early stage before it had been installed. So there wasn't wasted material that had been created and then taken away. And there wasn't the whole process of trying to do that in a building that had been handed over and possibly could have been a live space. So, we saved a lot of time there. A number of other things that we did, we utilized things like point cloud scanners to give a more accurate representation of the constructed asset, so to make sure it was in the right place, and we put the mechanical, electrical elements in the right place. We also utilized augmented reality. So we had a piece of software that allowed us to view the models on mobile phones. And that allowed you to overlay the model on top of what your camera could see on your phone.
On a construction site, you mean?
On a construction site, yeah. So basically, when you had an internet connection, you downloaded the model onto your phone, you walked out onto the site, and using the augmented or the AR kit or AR Core or Google and Apple stuff, basically you could approximately line up where you were with where you are in the real world, where you are in the digital world, and it would overlay on top of your camera screen or your screen where the digital model was in comparison to the real world. Now, it wasn't millimeter perfect, it was probably plus or minus 20 millimeters. But what it did do is it highlighted a number of areas where there was either data rail missing in our sample rooms, or there was additional elements that shouldn't have been there that were there. And in some instances, there was some trunking that was put into place because it had to be there. It just was missed off the design model at the time. So we managed to get that sorted out. So that proved to be a massive benefit for being able to quickly and efficiently check supply chain work and quality of work on site. And we provided access for those models as well for all our supply chain. So it wasn't just something that was being utilized by us, but it was used by our supply chain. They loved it as well. They had access to it, and they could fly around it, and they could look at to see what it was that they were doing. And really, really good, really, really good. So there's a number of stories from that particular project, and in fact, very similar stories from a number of other projects as well. For different elements.
That's quite an interesting process, and it's good to see that this whole world of technology is likely to be very much a standard part of the future when we get there. But there's obviously this whole social distancing sort of things. You can see naturally the benefits of something like that, and not having to have somebody to actually be there quality checking it and coordinating that and marking out grid lines and so on. I can see lots of benefits in there. But what do you think for the audience here today, what do you think one takeaway would be in terms of BIM as a whole, and what steps they should take in terms of embracing technology in the digital world?
BIM is something that for a lot of people is outside of their comfort zone. For some people, it's far outside their comfort zone, and it's something that they will probably never engage with fully. And that's all right. That's fine. That's not a problem. For others, it'll be something that's just outside their comfort zone, but within what's known as the learning zone. And basically what that means is that BIM's a process. It can be scary, it can be difficult, and it might seem like it's not providing any benefits immediately. But with a lot of new processes and a lot of new ways of thinking, it takes time to understand. It takes time to see how it can be used properly within your organization, because every organization will have a slightly different take and a slightly different way of utilizing it. But basically, don't be scared of it is the biggest thing about it. It's actually a lot easier than you think. And for the majority of people who are dealing with BIM, there's not a huge amount for them to be cognizant of and to deal with. It can definitely be broken down into a small number of discrete items they need to be aware of to look after. That's the process side. To get it really, really implemented, you have to have a shift in understanding within your business. Because what BIM will do is, if it's done properly, is it will make things a lot more transparent. And that's the thing that can be very difficult for some people, is the transparency that digital can bring can be scary, because it forces people to collaborate where people might have been able to hide in the shadows, as it were, in the grey areas of construction. You can't do that with BIM. It's very, very difficult to do that. So what it means is that you have to trust the other people on your project team and the other people that you deal with to get the project moving forwards and making sure it's a successful project. So yeah, that's probably a bit of a long takeaway, that one, but
so in 2 words, it'd be collaboration and trust.
Yeah, and one thing to bear in mind is that there is a big difference between coordination and collaboration. If I tell you what I'm doing, great, that's coordination. That's not collaboration. People need to understand that, and it's all right to coordinate. You don't have to collaborate with everyone. Sometimes you only need to collaborate with a few people. Sometimes you need to collaborate with everyone. And it will be different on a project by project basis. But you need to understand that there is a big difference between coordination and collaboration. I think there's some great work that's being done by, I believe they're called Behaviors for Collaboration. I think you can find their group on LinkedIn, and they have some fantastic matrices and a few other learning guides and helpful tips and tricks that you guys can have for working in a collaborative environment and understanding where you are on the road to collaboration. Because being collaborative is about being honest and saying exactly where you are at all times.
Good. Well, that's been really insightful. Thanks very much, Andrew. Very much appreciate your time. Now, if anyone has got questions, you should be able to ask them on the page. There should be a embed where you'll be able to ask your questions, which will be live answered later on in the panel discussion. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Andrew. Again, another very interesting interview there. If you do have any questions for Andrew, then please do scroll down to the Slido up below. I'd now like to introduce Alistair Lewis. Alistair's the Head of Technology at ACG Architects.
Hello, so welcome. Glad to have you on board with us today. It's a good event for the benefit of the audience. Would you mind just starting off introducing yourself?
Okay, so I'm Alistair Lewis. I am the Head of Technology at Air Chamberlain Gaunt, which is an architect practice, has an office in Basingstoke and London. My role is, as the Head of Technology, covers BIM and a lot of other things, including the IT, the hardware, software processes, and how we work and work more effectively with digital technologies. My background is as an architect, and I practiced as a normal architect for a number of years. And then I've slowly migrated into this different role through being a dedicated BIM manager, and now the sort of head of technology role, which is encompassing a whole range of different things, but predominantly is about the digitization of what we do as a practice.
Thanks for that. So we're here today talking primarily about BIM and how digital tools can really be an accelerator to construction, especially for the future. Tell us a bit about the importance. I know BIM implementation and the client integration with that is close to your heart. Tell us a bit about that and your thought process.
So with BIM, we are, in terms of our practice here, we've changed quite a lot over the last few years. And the aims behind BIM is that it's a process in terms of how we work and work more effectively, and focuses on the production of information in terms of 3D models and coordinated models and that side of things, but also on the information side of things. And that's very much where we see client benefits coming through, because BIM is a process that covers the whole life cycle of a project. So all the way from the inception, all the way through to design, construction, handover, and in use. And the greatest benefits of this process is in use, where clients have much better information to understand their buildings, how to use them, how to maintain and manage them over a long period of time. My background is I've worked in local authority, and it's a really good example for how clients can benefit from that, because they're a large estate owner. They've got lots of different assets, buildings generally across a whole range of different areas. And if they had a way of managing and understanding those assets and all the information that's attached to them, that's going to make them a much more effective and streamlined organization. And that runs across basically to all clients, whether you have one building, whether you have a number of buildings. It's about really focusing and saying, actually, what do we need? What are we looking for from this asset? And understand that from the outset. And ideally involving as many people from that life cycle approach to the project as possible. So architects, engineers, landscape architects, your client, your end users, facilities management, all of those people should be involved in a conversation from the outset to say, okay, this is what we are looking for from a project.
So how closely do you think, and when do you think the process this starts? Does it start like REBA stage 2? Is it 3? Where do you think BIM is ideally adopted? Where should that collaboration start with the other consultants and the supply chain generally?
So ideally, and this I'm talking ideally because it doesn't always happen, but it should be from a stage 0, when a client says, okay, I think I need a new building or a new extension or something. And they should be doing, if you follow the BIM level 2 requirements, they should be following the ones to look at their organizational needs and their kind of asset needs as well. So there's a number of documents that clients can put together prior to embarking on a project that would be really useful for the consultant team or the contractor team to respond to. So traditionally, this is, I'm talking about the BIM Level 2 approach here. And I should mention that the BIM Level 2 approach has evolved into the UK BIM framework now, and it is changing and moving forward. So if you want to see more information on that, it's worth checking out the UK BIM Alliance website, and you'll understand that transition and what that looks like. But in terms of BIM Level 2, which is pretty much where we are now, where it's a good place to start, clients should be looking to understand what they have currently and what they would like to be looking for from their project that they're trying to put together. So if they are developing a new building, they should be understanding what information requirements they need from that when they come to managing it, how it's going to integrate into their asset management system, how they are going to use and manage that, and understanding what they will then ask their contractor team or their consultant team to be producing. So the output from all of that should be that they create what's called an EIR, which is Employer's Information Requirement, or an Exchange Information Requirement. That's the latest terminology now. And that document should say to the consultant team, this is what the client is looking for. This is the data requirements. These are the modeling requirements. This is how we want you to share information. And this is what we're looking for at the end of this process when it comes to the handover and how we manage that project.
So in terms of when you start integrating and the different people as you go through the project, there's more and more parties involved, obviously, naturally. Do you think the collaboration with supply chain partners, especially in the external envelope where you've got a lot of complicated details which come together and penetrate each other and so on, what stage do you think, assuming we've got the developer or the client at the end of the top of that hierarchy, if you like, or the chain, assuming they've got a clear vision on what they're wanting to do with the BIM throughout their projects and so on, what stage do you find is best in real life terms, actually involving that supply chain?
Yeah, I think it depends on the supplier or the subcontractor. Going from that kind of my last response, talking about the employer's information requirement, that involves into the BIM execution plan, which is the design team response, the contractor team response to that, saying, okay, this is how we're going to work. And as you say, as different parties come on later on in that process, they should all inform that BIM execution plan and start saying, well, okay, we are, let's say, a window installer. We're going to produce this type of information for you at this stage, and it's going to integrate into your information. So I think it will always come down to the particular type of subcontractor or supplier. So there's an example, there was a project which was looking at glulam beams, and they needed them to come on board very early on in the design process to actually support the design development so that they were actually in part of that. But clearly that wouldn't be the same for all subcontractors or suppliers, and they can come in at the right time. And I think very much it is about planning and understanding when you need something, rather than saying, okay, we want everyone up front, that would be brilliant. It's actually getting the timing right, because you don't want to waste anyone's time. And like the windows are a good example, that you bring them in, you obviously have a conversation at design stage saying, okay, we're going to use this type of system, and then later on they will produce their own package of work based around hopefully your model and information, and then you will integrate their models into yours and do that kind of clash detection and cross-referencing to make sure it all works really well. Another example of that is with the structural framing systems like METSEC. They typically use Revit for the production of their modeling now. So if we're using Revit, which we tend to do in-house, when it comes to that stage 4, that their design, we can bring it into ours and do that clash detection or clash avoidance session to make sure it all integrates well with our design. And then that all happens before we get on site. So I think that's where we would like to be before we get onto site, is that all the key elements on a project are digitally resolved in 3D, and we know what that looks like, so that when we get on site, it's a matter of constructing it rather than getting on site and realizing, actually, this isn't coordinated. We've got problems between METSEC and steelwork, for example. So, the aim is to have this digital representation of your project before you get on site. I think if you've got any key elements that go into that, whether it is windows or the framing or any bespoke detailing, it's best to get the model for those up front and understand how that all integrates. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, it does. And really what you're saying there is it depends how integral that part of the envelope or the item is. You're not going to want every door handle or something modelled from an early stage, but especially probably if you're manufacturing the bulk of the scheme off-site, DFMA and the rest of it is quite a key process, and the earlier that starts with, if for instance you're doing precast wall panels and so on, that would be quite a major component to getting there early doors.
Absolutely, and that's a really good point. So if you're using cross-laminated timber that's all cut off-site, you need to get all of those holes integrated first before you get on site, so you can get all your services through and you know where all those elements are formed. So it's very much about that being, just doing that design that one stage earlier so that we can get on site. And it comes back to being a benefit to clients. If we can get on site, it is coordinated, there'll be less issues, there'll be less delay and less claims essentially, because it's being, you've done all of that work up front, which is, one of the major reasons why BIM is such a benefit to clients, is if you can coordinate this and get it all resolved, when you get on site, it's going to be better. And I have had, have experience of that myself. Yeah. And when it is better, it's, it's a much better working relationship and experience for everyone.
And probably a quicker process as a result as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So give us a sense about an example of a project which you've delivered with this process and some of the benefits and some of the digital benefits you embraced in that project.
Okay, so I was thinking there's a couple of projects we've done in-house here. So one of them is an existing building. It's a Grade 2 listed building from the 1990s, so fairly recently. And we have been asked to convert that building, it's an office building at the moment, into a later living building and establishment. And clearly, the existing fabric of that building has to be preserved because of its grade listing. So we did a point cloud survey of that building, and we then used that to create a 3D model of the building in Revit. And that has allowed us to coordinate with the other consultants, structural engineers and mechanical and electrical engineers, and completely understand actually where all the crossovers are and where all the internal elements that are going to be constrained and tight are. It also allows us to communicate those designs to conservation officers and to the wider public, to show actually the building isn't being damaged or changed from its original character as we move forward, and that with a 3D imagery, we can really communicate to clients what that looks like. So that's one example, kind of early stages using point clouds. We've got another project in-house, which was a large kind of housing development. So number of units, over 200 kind of houses of different scales and sizes, and using traditional workflows, which would have been 2D and let's say AutoCAD or Vectorworks or something like that, would have been quite challenging because of the size and scale of the work. So by using 3D basically and Revit to use that, to produce that information, we, this is the sort of the graphical side of BIM, we were able to model all of those buildings, the different unit types, get them onto the plan, create all the different links into that file. It's much more effective and efficient for ourselves to produce that information in that way. And the upshot of that is that we could export all of our information quickly and efficiently, which is what we want to do because we're trying to be, really focus on our processes. But in addition to that, we had something called a common data environment, which is a key aspect of BIM Level 2. And we offer that service for our clients now and say, look, if you need access to a common data environment, we can produce one and you can use that. And it's BIM Level 2 compliant. And it allows us to share all of the information on the project in a centralized location. So it's a single source of truth for that information. And all of the different consultants would upload their information there, but also download information from that as well. So it is about centralizing that information. So when you think of BIM, it's about, a lot of people think about Revit and models. That's one aspect of it, but BIM can be better information management, and that's a key criteria to it. And this common data environment was very much about how do we allow the client and consultant team to access up-to-date information. That has also followed a really rigorous quality control process. So it's been checked, reviewed and approved, uploaded, and the different consultants can access that information. So there's two examples of sort of early stage kind of 3D modeling with point clouds, but also later stage, stage 3 use of common data environments to share that information.
So do you think would that be a recommendation to the audience there, that it is managed by an architect as a central, is that the best way of doing it? You're becoming the kind of conducting the orchestra, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. I'm completely biased. I'm an architect by background. I work in an architecture firm. I truly believe that architects are extremely well placed to take control of this process, which is partly why we've invested in the common data environment and invested in Revit and changed our workflows and upskilled all of our staff to understand what BIM is as a process, how they can use Revit and be central to that process. And, I feel really passionately that architects should be that lead designer, that consultant that takes all those models from other consultants. We perform clash detection, we manage the data and the information, and it is a key role that clients should be looking for us, to perform for them. And that's what we're developing here at the moment, is saying, actually, okay, we've got our architectural skills, and we're passionate about design and good quality buildings, but also we are developing BIM services for our clients, whether it's common data environment or information management or BIM coordination, because we are traditionally, I'm talking very traditionally, the lead consultant who would perform that role. It's just that we have a lot more technology to support us doing it. And that role has been lost a little bit with different contracts and different kind of, risk aversion maybe that has come out. So we're really keen to actually demonstrate our leadership in this role and say, look, we can perform this for clients, and we're desperate to get them the best quality output that they can.
Yeah, so one of the, just moving the conversation on slightly to an old word you might have heard a few times, Brexit.
Oh no.
It's, I was thinking really, we've got this kind of Brexit triggered a whole conversation in the magazines, the trade magazines, about maybe shortages and how that can be addressed. We had the Mark Farmer report. We had the about modernise or die.
Yes.
And then we've got the COVID crisis and the social distancing and so on, which comes out of that, which ultimately again is only another influence, which is compressing that whole ability to work efficiently, if you like. Do you think that the BIM conversation, the digital at large, has got a key role to play in the increasing of this productivity and reducing of the dependency on site-based labour? What are your comments on that?
Yeah, okay, that's really big and broad, isn't it? I suppose to start with, I would say that the UK government BIM agenda since 2012 has been, I think it's fair to say, world leading. So our development of the BIM level 2 requirements, all of the standards that go alongside that, I don't think there's any other country that has something of equivalent quality and scope, basically. And I think it's a really extraordinary thing that the construction industry has produced. And we're looking at things like the BIM task group, which isn't here now, but the BIM Alliance and what they're doing, and now the transfer for the Centre for Digital Built Britain at Cambridge University, who are developing that further. And the outcome of all of those standards, which were national and were being adopted in the Middle East and other places, has now been transformed into the ISO 19650 international standard for BIM, which basically means that we have, influenced and contributed massively to an international standard. And as an industry, we can take a lot of pride in the fact that actually we have done this and achieved it. I think there's a huge amount of work for clients and consultants and the whole of the design team to take on board, whether it's BIM level 2 or the new international standard, and actually start working with that. And as I said earlier, we're really keen to support clients with it. But that whole agenda at a really big sort of macro scale is really exciting. And when you look at the Construction 2025 report, which came out in 2013/14, I think, it was talking about an improvement in exports and how we can export our talents, and the Brexit conversation feeds into that, because we know there's going to be probably limited work in this country relative to what could have been previously, and we're going to have to go out to the world a lot more and sell our skills. And I believe the UK construction industry is regarded very highly. But I think, this whole BIM agenda and what we've done there really supports that. In terms of the production of information, design for manufacture and assembly, how that links into the post-COVID-19 environment. Absolutely, if we can digitally produce information that can be then produced in a factory environment, which can be a lot more controlled than being on site, and then bring it to site, I think absolutely, I would definitely think that's the right way to go. And I know that there's huge experiments with that at the moment. We are doing a volumetric off-site construction project at the moment, and we are learning a lot from that process, as is the client and the contractor for that. And I don't doubt that there will be future projects where we will try and create a lot more off-site elements before we start saying, okay, now we need to think about what that looks like on site. But the digital technologies out there support that. And one of the things that I think a lot of people worry about with programs like Revit or ArchiCAD is that they just replicate the production of 2D information. Even though you've got a 3D model, the output is still a drawing. Whereas actually what we'd like to see is you've created a model, take that straight to manufacture and get it produced for site. Why do we have to produce a drawing, which then goes to someone else who then may produce their own drawing, which we then check, and then they create something, and then it goes on site? That we're going to be looking for that efficiency of flow between the design to manufacture and how we transfer the information. And Revit is clearly one piece of software that does that, but I know that there's people working with a lot more advanced softwares to actually aid that process, and we will be looking at that over time as we move forward.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a domino process there of kind of, as you get things better coordinated up front and so on, it makes volumetrics and the embracing of technologies on site, which can also help reduce the labour and so on. It's that whole knock-on effect, isn't it, throughout the industry?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you have one takeaway tip which the audience you'd like to give to the audience?
So I could talk so much about all of this. I think what we're looking at the moment is we are seeing a lot more clients coming to us asking for BIM, and they are clearly, the BIM agenda is out there, and people understand that it's useful, and we're getting a lot more clients looking for that, and we want to support more clients in that process. So very much the takeaway is, if you are a client, we very much look like them to say, actually, come to us and we will support them in that journey where they learn more about BIM, the requirements, what they should be looking for, and not having to say, okay, it's BIM level 2 from the outset, but actually saying it could be BIM 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and they move up and get more capable over time. It's not about doing the whole thing up front. And then also with the new ISO 19650 standard, if clients want to adopt that and look towards that as well, then again, we are really keen to support that journey. I just really, I suppose the key takeaway is, I'll get there eventually, is that I'd like all of the design team, consultants, clients, contractors, facility management, to really engage with it and ask questions about it and find out how it could benefit them, because the advantages are out there, they're clear to see. And I would recommend, if you do want to see those benefits, there is a PricewaterhouseCoopers document, a report they've done, which look and analyzes the benefits on a BIM level 2 project, and it shows savings across all the project work stages, and in particular during the final one. And that's what we need to be looking at for clients. Basically, all of us should be moving forward and supporting that. But definitely recommend that report because it's very useful.
Good, thank you very much, Alistair. Very much appreciated. For all the audience watching this, please ask your questions in the embed below, and we'll answer them live on the Q&A panel. Thank you very much for your time, Alistair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair. We look forward to seeing you on the panel later today, where he'll be answering any questions posed to him through Slido below. I'd now like to introduce Sean Farrell. Sean is the UK Information Manager, Service Lead and Associate Director at UK BIM Alliance.
Welcome, Sean. We're glad to have you on board today to talk about the whole role of digital and in particular BIM. Could you give us a bit of background behind who you are and your roles?
Happy to, Nick. Thank you for inviting me. My name's Sean Farrell. I'm the UK lead for our Information Manager Service and BIM Advisory at Bureau Happold, and I'm also privileged to be a member of the Executive Board for the UK BIM Alliance, co-leading the operations team, and I also lead the UK BIM Alliance London region.
Thanks. So just starting with really drilling down to the centre of the thing, what do you define BIM as? There's many of us in the product manufacturing world and across industry which perhaps have a tendency just to look at BIM as being this 3D software which is slightly more advanced for coordination purposes. But what is it to you?
BIM, for me, I hijacked the acronym, and rather than calling it building information modelling, I always refer to it as better information management.
Okay.
It's interesting, though, when we use the term better, it implies we were measuring it to begin with and that we can demonstrate improvement. A lot of the things we want to see are by instinct, we know it's not right, but we're not actually measuring it. So when the term BIM came out, what I was always impressed with was when the UK government wrote their construction strategy, people think it was the BIM strategy, but it's not. BIM was one portion of a supporting method to improve the construction industry. And so that's what I would always like to think it as, is that rather than trying to define it too closely to one thing, it's saying it is one of the methods to improve our industry, both its internal processes and the products that it delivers. And it's, for me, what it has done is it's refocused a very manual industry on the importance of data. I think that's the biggest thing it's stepped forward, is it's got us talking about data, be it models, be it data in spreadsheets, be it data in project programs, be it data in asset registers. Now the construction industry is much more comfortable talking about data, and I think that mustn't be underestimated as a huge success of the BIM movement since 2016 and the government mandate.
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting take on that. And one thing I'm quite interested to ask you about, I know it's something which you've got quite a definite opinion on. Is it building? What's the difference between building better buildings versus building buildings better?
You got your mouth around that very well. For me, as I said, there are two aspects of it. Is if we're considering the delivery of a project, that is the planning, the design, the construction, and the handover, we're looking to optimize that process so we can deliver the best product in the most efficient manner possible for the benefit of everybody. So that's building buildings better. So that's the better process, a more efficient construction industry. That leads us into all the questions around: do we use platforms? Do we use assembly? Do we still use wet trades? Do we use prefabrication? Do we do one size fit all? Do we do three? All these possibilities of how can we improve our industry? Everything from all the things the construction industry strategy addresses, which is better procurement, more transparency, shared risks, shared reward. then the other side of it is the products that we actually build. So if we do treat our industry as a producer of products, our client base, I'm sure, if they could buy their product from somewhere else, would rather buy it from somewhere else than for the construction industry. I think many of our clients see us as sometimes a necessary evil. It depends on the value we deliver. And I think that's where we come into it, is that when we're talking about building better buildings, that's the value proposition.
Yeah.
And for me, it's if we can build better buildings, we then say, right, what makes a better building? Well, then let's optimize for the building of a better building. If there's anything we do in the construction of a building that creates an inferior product, we should stop doing it. So I mean, that for me, I mean, our clients have different motivations. And that's what we need to understand. It's the motivation of our clients.
Sure. So the first part of that, the building better buildings, that's about kind of having that right vision, understanding what you're doing and creating something which is better than it would or maybe at the moment. So for instance, more sustainable or so on. Once you've got that, surely the two work together, and the fact of building buildings better becomes a lot better and a lot easier to work together in synergy and harmony.
Well, that's part of it, because every organization has a different motivation. So getting a common motivation to optimize the process means a lot more, I'm going to coin a term that everyone uses, collaboration and communication. But in that collaboration, it can also mean some compromise, or if not some compromise, some expansion. And some of the things that people talk about with the advent of BIM, we're being asked to produce more data. When you actually break it down, you're being asked to produce a little more data, but you're also being asked to produce the data you always did, but in a different format. And I think that's where some people are looking at, oh, well, it's harder to do because I used to just give you this, and now you're asking for me like this. And so, well, it's the same information in a different format. And I think the challenge we see is that the industry is slow moving.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of embedded and valuable data that's embedded, but it's embedded in something that's no longer of a 21st century format. So it's on paper, or it's in documents, or it's in scanned documents. And then if it's scanned, it needs to be OCR'd so you can search for it. We're seeing that. What we're trying to do now is saying, if you're going to start something afresh, you shouldn't be starting as your lowest level. You should be starting higher, which is to say you should be starting with digital in mind. You should be starting with data in mind, and not in the mindset you had when you made information 20 years ago.
Yeah. So is it right for people to start embracing what they may see as the kind of the BIM journey, if you like, what was perhaps being commonly conveyed in magazines and so on back when it was introduced in 2006 at the time?
I think this is what you asked before, and where does the UK? I think you're going to ask me later on, but I think this is where organisations like the UK BIM Alliance come in, because part of it is being able to look at what your role is and where you fit in the supply chain and where you fit in the process and the life cycle of better buildings or building better, and then being able to make it relevant to you. Because I think what some of the confusion came around the mandate was this suite of documents came out and they gave the same suite to everybody. So, for a project manufacturer, as you're saying, the product manufacturer's background, the information you want to know is different from a project manager. So how can I think that I want to give the same information to both people and they'll both get it, for want of a better word? And so I think what we're seeing now is a much more understanding of that. And that's why you see the guidance coming out and institutes getting on board saying, okay, let's get behind the framework. Let's understand we're all heading towards a common goal, but let's now distill without modifying, but distill so we understand what our portion is so we can deliver it to the best of our capability.
How good do you think the industry is at the moment in actually delivering it the way it should be being delivered? Or do you think we're on the right track?
Better year on year, but still a long way to go.
Sure.
Because we're at the main challenge. Anyone who's from outside the industry who comes into it, they suddenly realise it's a mammoth industry. It's made up of many, many moving parts, and the shift in scale is quite dramatic. So when you're if we look at stage 5 and the construction part, let's leave design alone and operation alone, but let's look at the piece in between. You can have what we call tier 1 contractors, thousands upon thousands of staff. So they'll receive BIM requirements or information requirements. They're probably very capable of receiving them, one would hope, at something of that scale. But then they've got to make those requirements, they've got to translate them or pass them down to the next tier, which could be a company of 200 people. So you've suddenly got a down step of 1/10 the resource and 1/10 the understanding of what is needed, because it's now abstracted. And then those guys have got to tell it to 2 people in a van. So in 2 contractual steps, you've gone from organizations of thousands of people to 2. And you're expecting to be able to cascade these high-level concepts to 2 people in a van.
And those
who are highly skilled and deliver the product on site, but they don't necessarily have a digital strategy.
Yeah, sure. And those 2 people in a van may have actually been working for another few companies because they're subcontractors, which
Exactly.
we'll talk about in a slightly different way. So,
and that's the complexities of our industry. And where does BIM fit in each of those scenarios? And that's what many organizations are now working on, because they've realized it's here to stay. The government's backing it. It's picked up all over the world. Right, now we need to understand the next challenges, and it is that challenges of scale and making things relevant so people know what they need to deliver. A painter and decorator does not need to deliver a model. But he does need to deliver a schedule of RAL colors that he's painting and the manufacturer for the paint, so somebody can reorder it.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, do you think digital is an accelerator to construction?
Done well and treated as change management, then yes, because as I tell the people, the digital aspect is made up of 3 things, and I call it the 70-20-10 rule. The digital transformation is 10% the tool you use, 20% the process you wrap around it, and 70% culture and people. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of the focus has been on the process and the tool, and not enough on the culture, which explains why it's been relatively slow to be picked up. Those who've really picked it up have understood digital as a cultural change and embraced it at a cultural and business level, and then figured out the processes and tools. They've not said, oh, here's a tool, we need to be able to work it into our business. As somebody in Google once said, a tool without a purpose is just a toy.
Yeah, absolutely sums up, doesn't it? So do you think post-COVID, post-pandemic, if there is such a thing at this stage,
or just the new normal?
Exactly. Do you think that digital has a key role in actually bringing back some efficiencies which are being lost over social distancing?
I'm going to turn that question around. Are there assumptions already that there is a loss of efficiency? Or is there an assumption that sometimes the office environment is not efficient because people like to take tea breaks and cigarette breaks, and whereas at home they're less likely to do that? I mean, the studies we found, because we've done internal studies, is that A, people feel they're more productive. B, meetings are shorter, but more of them. Disadvantages, people are literally waiting for your light to go green so they can call you and have a half-hour chat. Not to say they didn't do that in the office, but there's a lot more back-to-back meetings, whereas if you were having a physical meeting, you would know that, oh, there's travel time, then there's the meeting, then there's the travel time. Whereas when it's solely digital, it's all back-to-back-to-back-to-back-to-back, which means when do you actually get your work done? From an environmental point of view, less travel, more time with family. I think it's different. It'll be different post-COVID when things get back to normal and you get the option to work digitally. At the moment, a lot of things are forced, so there's some weird pressures, like people with families don't find they can work during the day because they have to look after their children because their carers can't come round. Which means then they're working at night, which means their then day is longer, which means then they're more tired. Whereas people without children who could be a bit more flexible are actually finding it quite beneficial. But I think the family dynamic is the bit that's been misunderstood, because people have to stay home and they have to look after their children because their children can't go anywhere. What it might look like in a post-COVID with more acceptance of people are having to figure out, well, I haven't got a printer, I haven't got a photocopier. That's a big bugbear for me, because I always said, the number of people who can't have a clear desk policy because they've got buckets of paper that they cart around with them. I've been paperless since 2009, mainly because in my notebook, I came back from a meeting and realized I couldn't read my own handwriting. So immediately went digital just for my own sanity. And I've never looked back. People know if they give me a paper document, I say, please scan it and send me the PDF, or have you got an online link? I can go and look at it. I don't want paper. So literally, I've now got my office down to a mouse and a laptop and a headset. That's all I need. So I think in the paperless office, I think has got a better chance for people working from home, because people don't want to clutter their homes with paper, unless they set a space aside and they're very paper based. Some people still are. It's a cultural thing. So in answer to your question about the COVID side, I think there's going to be I don't know how long it'll be before people forget there ever was COVID.
Yeah. But I was thinking more particularly, do you think there's a key role to be played by digital in terms of site labour, where typically you would have had a couple of people going around measuring out and marking out grid lines and other stuff, and then you got a plumber working beside them and other trades. Do you think that the whole digital world will help with the kind of minimising the need for having all those people on?
That's a different proposition, because that you're going down what's the future of the construction site if we move from construction to assembly?
Yeah.
Which is the government's approach to a platform-based approach, which is, and I worked on this a couple of years ago when I was out in Russia. We looked at, can you design residential from a kit of parts of 32 objects, and with all its different configurations? And we said, yes, you can. That was driven by poor quality labor. We don't really suffer from that challenge here. What we suffer from a challenge is waste on site, and other different challenges. Whether that's a cultural problem or a technology problem, you have to look at it on a situation by situation. Some of the things we look at, one of the ones I struggle with, because I've seen it so many times on site, is the requirement for site measurements, i.e. verification that someone's gone in. So you're required as the steelwork guy to go in and validate that your steel columns are in the right place. Now, you know where your columns and your beams are, but then someone has to go in, because they're putting the ceilings in, to validate that the columns are in the right place so the ceilings don't. Well, why are you? The guy who measured the columns has already measured it. Oh, yeah, but he hasn't given us his data. Oh, and by the way, legally, we're not allowed to rely on it, because we're only insured if we go and measure it ourselves. So I've seen on one project the same dimension taken 60 times and charged the client 60 times.
And that's because of the kind of the risk-based approach as an industry.
Yeah, the risk-based approach. You must go and verify for yourself. You can't trust anyone else's information.
And if I have got it right, I still don't want to share it with you.
Yeah. And so we're seeing, when I'm doing my role now, I'm stepping into clients and going, you do realize this is going to happen. You should engineer your contract, because it's only the contract that enables or disables it, to say that one person will go and take a jet dimension and you can rely on it. Therefore, you only have to visit once.
Interesting. So in summary of all this, do you have a couple of takeaway points for the audience today?
Yes. Don't get so wrapped up in digital that you don't forget the real world. We're going to succeed when we understand the interface between digital and the real world and what the roles they have to do. Another one is, just because we can doesn't mean we should. So just because we can do a thing doesn't mean we should do a thing. It should be looked at in how it fits into the landscape. And then the other one is what we started out as. Are we trying to make the construction industry's delivery better, or are we trying to make the built environment better through the products we deliver?
Good. Thanks very much for your time, Sean. Much appreciated.
No worries.
Thank you, Sean. Remember, if you have any questions for Sean for the panel today at 1 p.m, then please scroll down to the Slido up below. I'd now like to introduce Tristan Parsons. Tristan is the Managing Director here at Sapphire Balconies.
Welcome, Tristan. I'm looking forward to getting some inspiration around what digital tools got for us in particularly in terms of Sapphire for the future. Over to you. Tell us a bit about what's happening.
Yeah, well, thank you, Nick. To be quite honest, I feel a little bit of a fish out of water in this scene, because I'm actually a little bit of a dinosaur when it comes to technology use. But I guess the reason why you've asked me to speak today is because I do have a great belief in technology for what it can do, rather than so much for what it is in itself. And I think it plays a key part in the future for ourselves and for the industry. I wonder if it'd be all right if I could just sort of tell a little bit of a story to explain kind of how we've got to thinking about this and looking at it for Sapphire. So I've had the privilege of being at Sapphire all my working life, and the story really sort of starts back in childhood, because my father had the idea of starting up Sapphire as a business when I was, I think, about 8 or 9 years old. So I grew up with the I think actually used to come home from school sometimes at 3 o'clock, and there'd be like a length of stainless steel tubing sort of parked in the hall, waiting for Dad to come home from site and chop it in half so they could put it into the garage. So I kind of grew up with this Sapphire theme, and the theme that's kind of that you can paint a picture over the whole of this is more of a theme of innovation, and digital technology really feeds into that story. So I'd just like to kind of talk it through as a few steps as we go through time, and then I'll show at the end of this kind of how technology really fits into that picture. So innovation, obviously, it really changes the world, and in our simple little Sapphire story, Sapphire 1.0, if you like, was innovation around balustrades. And just simplifying these things down to just a couple of points. The innovation in balustrades, how it really helped the market and helped change the world, firstly was around beautiful. So the balustrades that we did in those years as Sapphire 1.0 was, we had a really clever way of kind of jointing stainless steel tubes together and calculating all the recent things. It made a really nice smooth flowing handrails around staircases, which really made it quite beautiful for people. Architects loved it. And secondly, was great quality. And my father led the idea of systemizing the balustrades in this. So a lot of the other people would kind of make bespoke things for every job, but we managed to systemize it. And kind of with these innovations, it kind of helps make us the preferred choice for architects and people in that industry, because they were beautiful products and great quality that they could rely on. And I'd like to also weave another thread into this, which is productivity. So just an interesting little number. Roughly speaking, in those balustrade days, for every kind of minute that we worked, we roughly were generating about £1 in productivity revenue. Then kind of moving on, fast forwarding quite a few years to 2014, our innovation went into balconies. So Sapphire 2.0 was when we kind of reinvented the balcony, and just really simplifying it down. What are the two things that really made a difference to people in the marketplace and balconies? Number one is it was safe. It was safer, and how we did that was because we kind of pioneered this method where balconies were installed from above, rather than having men working underneath a really heavy balcony swinging over their heads. We managed to install always from above, so that was a big plus. And the other innovation is far quicker. So our first, this is where the glide-on technology comes in, and our first glide-on project, we managed to install 22 balconies in 6 hours, which was probably about sort of 3 or 4 times as fast as the industry norm. So these couple of innovations really changed the way the market looked at balcony design, set new standards, and thanks to those activities, we achieved approximately in that early days of balconies, we're achieving approximately £2 of revenue for every minute that we worked. It wasn't long though before we thought, well, how could we innovate this to the next step? And this next one was not so much balcony or balustrade innovation. This was actually business model innovation. So Sapphire 3.0, if you like, is balconies in a supply-only business model. And just simplifying that down to a couple of key points. How does that changed the world? How has that made life better for people? Number one is timely, on time, and project delays due to kind of waiting for balconies or not being able to fit certain bits before others to suit construction sequence. It's timely, and the reason for that is because we've innovated a make-to-store business model. So we always make the balconies way in advance of when they're needed, and we put them into storage. It's really flexible for the customers to call off whenever they're ready for them. And the other reason why I think this business model innovation helped is because it's really taken quality to a new level in terms of like snag-free. Because we unbundled, is kind of one of the words I use, that we split apart that blurry line, if you like, between who's making the product and who's installing it, where it's all one party doing it. It's a bit of muddle there, but because we've segregated that and not a supply and business model, it's really enhanced the quality, and we have to deliver a perfect quality product, so much so that we were able to offer our brand promise, where we pay £100 cash back to anybody if for any reason we ever deliver a balcony that's got any defects on it. And with these changes, it's really driven a massive increase in productivity. So actually achieving these days about £5 of revenue for every minute of work we put in. So balustrades 1.0 was like £1, balconies 2.0 £2, Sapphire 3.0, where we innovated the business model, actually achieving £5 revenue per minute. As I'm not a specialist in this sort of stuff at all, but you see articles from time to time, and that report called Modernise or Die, and the things complaining, if you like, about all the struggling productivity in construction. But I think innovation is the way to break that. Which leads me on to Sapphire 4.0, which is really what fits in with the theme of the session today, which is really digital innovation. And why do I think that digital innovation might make life easier for the market? I think it's going to make it easy. It's going to make things much easier for the parties concerned. The reason I think that is because there's a lot of specialist knowledge that goes on, a lot into doing processes, but technology enables us to de-skill those processes and actually make that easier for people. That the software can make you become an expert by enabling you to do things that you would otherwise need an expert to do for you. So it can really make things easier for you to go on and do things at whatever time or place you're at, in terms of designing balconies and choosing what's right for your situation. And the other reason is value for money. I think using technology as an accelerator can really give the marketplace a great enhancement in value for money, because it can eliminate a lot of the waste. So during those few years we've been doing balconies, we've driven up the productivity a lot. I think when we kind of came into it, a typical balcony would take around about 100 man hours. We'll go into designing and selling and designing, all the work that goes into it from start to finish, about 100 man hours. In our business today, I think we've got it down to around about 30 man hours. So it's threefold, down to probably less than a third of the amount of man hours that goes into us supplying a balcony. And I think technology, so largely that's to do with the business model innovation, but I think technology will take that a whole lot further and eliminate a lot of that unnecessary work that can be automated. And absolutely, in our case, it's not at all to replace people. We believe really strongly in our team and the value of everyone on our team, and we want to use them to do more skilled jobs and use their initiative to continue innovating rather than doing mundane jobs, which we can use technology to automate. And my hope is that we'll be able to double our productivity again, get it up to, for every minute we put in, we're delivering £10 of revenue. And this, of course, will help eliminate a lot of waste and deliver those savings to our customers. So I firmly believe that I'm sure there's lots of other players out in the construction industry. it's not that we're technology experts ourselves, but we are innovators, and what we're passionate about is what technology can do, how it can help us achieve those productivities, help us deliver those benefits to the customers in terms of making life easier, things quicker, giving you better value for money. And we're investing heavily into technology for this purpose.
Thank you, Tristan. Again, another very interesting topic there. If anyone would like some more information about cabs, then please do go to our website. I'd now like to introduce Elston Gurr. He's our sales manager here at Sapphire Balconies.
Thanks, Kelly. My name is Elston Gurr. I'm the sales manager here at Sapphire Balconies. One of the things that digital can do for us is help us compare different forms of construction in a variety of ways, involving the buildability, but also the commercial side. Are there any potential hidden savings from comparing these types of construction? Today, I'm going to be presenting something that Sapphire have explored in the marketplace on how we can bring a better balcony solution to the table. We talk about a number of benefits, but we don't often talk about how those benefits can tangibly form into commercial savings. Hence, I've called this presentation, There's Definitely Benefits, but Where's the Money? So let's talk about the speed of installation in a bit more detail. Sapphire have installed 34 balconies in just 6 hours. That's our record install. Now, we can comfortably say that we can install 10 to 15 balconies a day. On average, conservatively, 10 to 15. So how can we take this benefit, this potential benefit, and save you some money on your project? Well, let's talk through a live example. Let's say a balcony scheme has 250 balconies, and a tower crane is the most common form of installing a balcony. Tower cranes cost, from market research and a lot of client feedback, approximately £5,000 per week, once you include a driver and the ancillary items. So typically we would be installing on site for about 3 days per week. Therefore, we leave 1 day to be winded off, or another day for the tower crane to be used for something else. We all know that hook time is very precious. So a couple of quick calculations. If we were installing 15 balconies a day, that's 17 days of install. Put that into a 3-day week, 6 weeks total install time. Let's consider other methods of installing balconies, such as a bolt-on. A bolt-on, about 5 balconies a day you're going to install maximum. Based on a 3-day week, we're looking at 14 weeks of installation time. So, simple calculation, we would save on a 250 balcony scheme, conservatively, hypothetically, 8 weeks. Times that by £5,000 a week, £40,000 saving. That's where we can see, program-wise, where we can bring something to the table. Don't forget, there's also many other forms of installation, such as mobile cranes. Being a lightweight balcony system, let us explore with you different ways that we could potentially install those balconies. The second major benefit that we believe we can bring to the table is reducing the number of castings or anchors on site. Sapphire, over the years, have worked with many third-party anchor companies. However, we never felt comfortable with those anchors, particularly because we wanted to come up with a very strong and robust anchor that took out any balcony bounce. Therefore, we've developed our own Sapphire M30 anchor, which has a 30mm thick stud included in the anchor. Now, consider the balcony frame itself. It's an aluminium chassis, therefore very lightweight. Once you combine the strong, robust anchor with the lightweight chassis, you have a very rigid balcony. Secondly, we reduce the need of the number of castings that is typically specified by your architect or structural engineer. Let's give you an example. You can see here a corner balcony. Corner balconies are very large balconies, therefore often requiring a number of castings. In this example here, we needed 9 anchors, so 9 third-party anchors. With Sapphire, after some structural calculations, we're looking to use 7 anchors. Let's play this out in another example. Taking the 250 balcony scheme that we spoke of earlier, on average, that scheme would probably need 4 third-party anchors. If you're using a Sapphire anchor, we'd probably need about 3. Therefore, on average, 1 anchor saved per balcony. Take that scheme in total, we would be saving about 250 anchors across the scheme, a significant number of anchors. What's detailed here is what is the typical cost savings by not having to procure that extra anchor. And we split this down here into the cost of a bracket, the cost of a stub. Then we have the reduction in the frame contractor setting out those different anchors. There's a labour element there. Then we have waterproofing and fireproofing. Now, these figures have been tried and tested in the marketplace, and we're very confident that these figures will stack up in your cost plans. We believe we can save £475 per bracket. Therefore, take those 250 brackets we're saving, you then get £118,750 saving on your scheme. So what we're really doing is highlighting some of the hidden savings that you may not think about when you're first planning your project. Therefore, we ask you to engage with us early on with your architects and structural engineers to design in our bracket to bring these savings to the table. Let's look at a summary. The summary here for a 250 balcony project scheme would be saving approximately 40 grand on the crane and approximately 118,750, giving you a total of 158,750 on your scheme. This is a very simplistic look at the project. On your Pacific project, we would go into a lot more detail about where we can bring savings. There's drainage. Our balcony system doesn't need any downpipes. We can also do a very strong comparison with concrete. We can remove downstands, propping, and much more. How does this link? How do we bring this all together? How does it link with the new digital age? Well, we've created what's known as the hypothesis tool. And it is a simple document where we put in project-specific data around your project, and we actually explore the project-specific savings. We're putting technology into this. We're looking at a computer-aided balcony design tool, which builds the project visually and then shows you the savings that you can bring to your scheme. So in summary, there's a number of key takeaways from what we've been discussing. Explore benefits that different systems can bring to your project. Work with your specialists to identify commercial, tangible savings that these systems can bring. We're also very excited to be incorporating this into our configurator that we've already developed and are continuing to develop. We can then give you an overall picture of the buildability benefits as well as the commercial savings. Many thanks for listening. We'd love you to get in touch with us. My name's Elston Gurr. I'm sales manager here at Sapphire. I also have an excellent team that would love to talk through any project-specific savings that we can bring. Tim Ward, Director of Client Relations, Lee Goodenough and Paul Thompson would happily take your inquiry to talk you through. Many thanks for listening, and we look forward to working with you soon.
Thank you, Elston. Again, if you have any questions for Elston on that topic, then please do scroll down to the Slido app below. And at 1 PM on the live Q&A session, I can pose those questions to him. I'd now like to introduce George Stevenson. George Stevenson is the Chair BIM for Housing and Managing Director at Active Plan.
Hello, George, and welcome. Glad to have you on board with us today. For the audience's benefit, if you could just go over a little bit about who you are and what your background is, please.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Essentially, my involvement in the industry has been quite long, on the basis of principally involved in data management. So being able to look at the ways in which information can flow through from the earliest stages of specification through design, construction, procurement, and into asset management. It's the asset management side of things that we've spent quite a lot of time working on to ensure that we can get the information that's needed to run safe buildings. So we're a software company. We develop applications, but one of the things that we've been trying to do is encourage people to use standard data. And as part of that journey, we've been working with organizations that are also interested in standardizing information sets, like the Building Research Establishment, the BRE, and we're working with other prominent organizations that have a similar objective. I'm also chair recently of BIM for Housing, and we've got quite an interesting group there of people who are similarly interested in changing the process to end up in situations where we've got an easier way of ensuring that we build quality buildings. So that's really my interest.
Thanks very much, George. So I'm quite excited for you to go through the kind of 7 foundations, give us a bit of a background behind this whole flow and what you feel is where we need to be going as directionally as an industry. Tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. Okay. Well, what I've got here is a graphic that just simply indicates the gulf that we currently have between the design and construction end of things, so the CapEx side, and the team that are then taking over what's produced during the BIM process in operations. And what we've been seeking to do is to create some building blocks that can bridge that gap. And a lot of that starts with standard data templates, which are defining what information is needed from product manufacturers. So once the product manufacturers know what's needed, they can create the right type of data. And the way in which they know what information is needed, the client's got to tell them. And so we've created digital tools rather than simply documents, digital tools that are able to require what information is needed. So the asset information requirements tool enables the client to say what it is they need. Because the information is then in a computer readable form, it can automatically be tested to make sure that what was asked for is being provided. And that then goes into a project information model, which is essentially the data side of the BIM process. And we've then that means that you've got the right information to produce the asset information model, which is what the client wants at the end of the day. One of the reasons that people perceive that they are getting this in BIM is because there's obviously a lot of information that you can put into a BIM model. The challenge is, where do you actually get that information from? Because in most cases, BIM models are used up until about stage 4, but then the construction teams are probably using spreadsheets, they're using drawings, documents, PDF files to record the information that goes into the building. And the result of that is that we end up with a gap in digital data, because the majority of the information is in the manual O&M information. And that's understandable, because the information that's in the geometric model is really designed for coordination and clash detection, whereas a lot of the information, for example, door closers, which from a fire perspective are very important, but you wouldn't normally expect those to be modeled. Also things like functional use and space, the way spaces are being used, activities, zones, and also the operational side of things with safety, fire safety, corridors and things like that. Again, that's normally information that is related to the model, but it isn't actually in the geometric model. So the result of that, which is amazing really, is that on many projects, people end up having to do retrospective surveys to actually find out what has gone into the building that's just been built. So brand new BIM models, buildings built with BIM, people are having to commission surveys to go and find out what's been installed in order that the asset management team can maintain them, which is obviously crazy. So one of the ways we're trying to address that is by creating standard libraries of information, which then makes it much easier for the designers, the contractors, and the manufacturers to provide the information that's needed. So we've got standard data templates for requirements, for products, solutions, and also maintenance procedures, installation procedures, commissioning procedures. So they then become something that can be automatically tested to make sure that what's needed has actually been carried out. And the result of that is that then provides the base information to feed into whatever applications are being used to run lifecycle planning, operating maintenance, BMS, etc. And the golden thread is something that Judith Hackett identified as something that's particularly important in residential. But what does that really mean? Well, we believe the process needs to start with the core information about the specification. And we can draw on that by having some of that information digitized so that we've got something then during the CDM process can be, again, coordinated and checked. By having standard libraries, we can automatically test to make sure that the information that's requested and required has been provided. But you've got to, as I was saying earlier, you've got to determine what information that is. So the digital asset information requirement needs to inform the product information. And therefore, what we're doing, we're creating what we call a golden key, which can start to fill up with information progressively as it becomes available. We've then got the information model, which then will generate a digital O&M. So this is something that's a data model which is designed that the FM people can interrogate and get the information that they need. And the result of that overall is something that can then manage the building for the next 20, 40, 50 years.
So what you're doing there is you're taking the golden thread, linking the different stages, the REBA stages, through there with a close way of knitting all that together digitally. Yeah, so what you're really doing is eradicating a lot of this recreation of information and so on. Is it, George?
Yes, it is. Yeah, what tends to happen is because the information isn't properly defined at the outset, then the designers and the contractors and even the manufacturers don't have a clear brief as to what's required of them. And the result is that it then gets recreated time and time again, and not necessarily in a complete and consistent way. So the idea principally is if you can, just as in manufacturing industry, in your industry, Nick, you don't start a project without having very clearly defined briefs, do you? And therefore, by having those individual data sets clearly defined, it means they plug together.
So tell us a bit more about this, working with this this thread and tying this whole process together, George.
Well, the golden key is really basically a reference item of reference that we put into what's called the asset information requirement. So it means that at the beginning of the project, you would determine the information you need. So you might have it for one of your balconies, or it might be some of the components that are within the balconies. So you can actually define that as an ID, which then can go into the specification. So the specification tool that a lot of people use is MBS. And if we can then pick up the specification, that can then be recorded and live through the life of the process, and it becomes the measure against which everything is tracked. Because we're providing that in a digital form, it can then read into the various different design applications and also the manufacturing and construction applications. So we end up with federated information, which both from a 3D modeling and a clash detection perspective all hangs together, but you've also got the right data. And we've designed it so that it will then also feed into the commercial applications. So maybe the applications like Oracle and Coins, which are used to order and coordinate and schedule what's being delivered. And through that, through to the parties that are putting together the O&M information and into the final operational use applications. By just having that key, it means that it's tying it all together.
So the collection of this information into one huge data portal and capturing that in one process, the key, as you referred to it, this gives a lot of power to be able to be interrogated and actually arrive at better solutions and better overall sharing of information and cutting the waste out of it. Is that?
Yes, that's certainly true. And I should say that what we're doing is not bringing it into one data portal. What we're doing is bringing it into an environment of interrelated data sets. The reason I'm saying that is that because if we're working with structured information, just as with your mobile phone, you've got applications that are talking to other applications that are talking to other applications. It's not all going back to a single source. Modern IT infrastructure allows you to manage that so that each of the different data sets is talking to each other. So as a customer, as a user, when you go onto Amazon, you may perceive that you're just on the Amazon portal, but actually you're talking with hundreds of different databases. And the important thing is the structured information is the thing that enables you to pull it together.
Yeah, that's right. I was thinking it's one journey really of putting that together, as opposed to what we get at the moment, as you identified as the gap there, or the fact that there may be a model created, but nobody wants to share that information. So the next person has to recreate it, and you've suddenly got this kind of every different person on the site recreating exactly the same details on that.
That's a very good point and a good example. So one of the things that I was showing you earlier was that the information that is really needed is coming from trade contractors. And those trade contractors have got the knowledge, but they probably aren't using a 3D modeling system. But their information is equally valuable. Now, what needs to happen is that information needs to be easily collected without them having to put it into a model. Currently, what happens is that information is often fed back to whoever's got the model, and they then add it into their 3D model. And that then breaks the ownership. It's introducing risk. And also, it's a non-added value process. So what we need to do is to make it so that the individual contractors own the responsibility for that part of the process, and they provide their information, and then the software glues it all together.
So that's a useful That's a useful overview of kind of how this can practically join together. What do you think the next step is for the industry, and how do we get to this stage where we've got this working harmoniously across the different platforms, across each stage of the process?
Well, one of the big challenges that Hackett has given us as an industry is change management, and the challenges that I think people are trying to wrestle with is that the industry does tend to value engineer. It does tend to swap things out, and there aren't robust processes to actually capture what's been changed. So this is the method that we're working through at the moment in BIM for housing. So you start with the asset information requirement, which you can then tie to a product if it's a product that the client wants to specify. But there might be a small range of things that they want to use as their standards. But then that same information then goes out to a designer, and the designer will then place the number of doors, for example, in the model, so we know where they are. And they may also link it to a product library. The product library then maps the manufacturer's product to the required item. But in most cases, designers don't actually, they're not the ones that are ordering the product, it's trade contractors. The trade contractor is then given a series of products, and they may want to change those because of availability or cost. But you need to make sure you've got the right quality. So the process that we've established is this is following the age-old contractual process of what's called a technical submittal. You do a comparison between what the contractor would like to buy and what the designer has suggested would be a suitable product. Once that's then cleared, they can then buy it, and then you've got a key there that's controlling the installation, commissioning, and then moving out. So we then end up with a reliable set of information. That's what's missing at the moment. There's a break at certain stages between design, detailed design and coordination, installation, and then commissioning. And then even at this stage here, which is stage 7, which is this is the in-use stage, often things get swapped out in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, or even during the warranty period. It's not properly recorded that that's been changed, whereas that's something that we need to do.
What we're talking about here then is starting with the end in mind, creating a vision based on having it pass seamlessly and get that woven together with the golden key concept. And then during the construction phase, that will make it more efficient and it'll be easier for parties working together, and subsequently making it easier to be managed post-build.
That's absolutely right. So in this example, we're bringing together the geometry, but here we're bringing together what's been installed. And this can be done through spreadsheets or online forms. And we're then tying that together so it can go and populate maintenance management systems, but it can also provide the other, say, IoT systems for something even as elegant as a digital twin. But it's also doing the nuts and bolts stuff, which is the O&M information. And by doing that, it means that we've got something that's robust going forward. So could I just give you an example of a project that we've done with Peabody?
That sounds good. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we basically were commissioned by Peabody about a year ago to help them on this journey. So we provided them the templates, which are standard ways of describing information and the requirements, and the product library. So we reverse engineered an existing scheme that had just been completed, and we took the O&M information and we extracted from that the information, and I'll show you in a moment what we've got there. So we use that to produce a set of library objects, which they're now using on a new scheme that they just it's just going into build now. It was delayed somewhat because of the of COVID, but it's just starting now, which is a big apartment in. But part of that, the product library, this is where we put the information, and this is a way of drawing together the information of the products and materials that are being bought. It standardizes the way they're described. And we've got a partnership with Travis Perkins where they're populating the product library with all of their information. So it's networking to the, if you like, the BIM libraries that are in the industry. Why are we doing that? Well, it's to really standardize the way product information is described, because different boiler manufacturers will often describe their information quite differently. Whereas if we can bring it into a format where that Baxi boiler and that Hovel boiler are described in the same digital way, so it means the data sheets that are produced are common. But importantly, what it also does, it traces and tracks from the product library which projects that particular product was used on. So in the case of Peabody, they now know that that particular heat interface unit was used on St John's Phase 1. Every time it's used on a future scheme, they've got a record that they've tracked that is the case. And that's the sort of thing that was mentioned in the Hackett report about mandatory occurrence reporting. Sort of thing that happens in the airline industry. So if a part fails, they want to be able to track all of the planes that part's gone into. But in our industry, in the construction industry, most people haven't got a clue, because this work was outsourced to a third-party contractor, and nobody would actually know whether it was the same heat interface unit.
So interestingly, George, as part of this event, we've also got the digital traceability when we were talking about the Passport app for tracing it, but it's quite an important but missing area in a lot of construction, isn't it?
Very much so, very much so. And I think once people realise it's possible to do, then it's a no-brainer that you should be doing it. It's just at the moment it's just too complicated.
Agree, and it's not necessarily difficult to do either. It's possible to do, but it can be simplistic to implement as well, which is an added benefit.
Yeah, so this is St John's Hill now. This is looking at what's called the COBE data, but we're viewing it through a browser. So where you've got a green thumb up, it means the information that was asked for in the asset information requirement at the outset has been satisfied. If something's been missing or is wrong, it would be red. As in here, so you'll see here that we've got, this is now testing this heat interface unit against the requirements. We've got lots of green, but there's a couple of things, expected life, for example, which is something that the client wants the information on that's missing. So the system is then able to report that, and then also to look at that from a data set perspective, and it can produce a spreadsheet or a form that's pre-populated with all the information that is there, but it's highlighted here in the spreadsheet or on this form the information that's missing. So it means it's much easier for the installation contractor to provide the information they need. And the result is that you've got an intelligent floor plan or a 3D model where when you click on an object, you can drill down and see what was actually installed, when it was installed, and the supply manufacturers. But by having that process, it means that that traceability is there. And the other point is that you can also have a photograph taken of the actually installed item. So here we've got the heat interface unit. This is what it looks like in the brochure. But you can have a photograph here of that particular item installed so you can check the workmanship. And also, here it's highlighting again that we need the serial number. And how does that information then get used? Well, here we've got it where we're driving this into Power BI. So this is a management information tool. It's not a BIM tool per se, but because we've got intelligent data, it means that this can be then managed within the corporate platform. And you've got interactive floor plans there. So somebody can come along and click on a space and see what's in that space, and also see the different information about what is in an apartment block. So we think this is a really important thing for improving the access to the information, because then it becomes a far more valuable corporate resource. So that's then just picking up all of the spaces that are in that particular apartment.
What we've got here is something which is quite beneficial to those in the audience, like the housing associations and so on, where it's something which is quite easily forgotten by those working on construction projects, but it's actually quite an important thing for the overall life cycle of the building and the use of that information, of which some of it is going to be quite important for the ongoing maintenance and safety of the building, isn't it?
Yes, and yeah, that's absolutely right. But it's also the case that because we're delivering this information into a more general business information environment like Microsoft Dynamics and Power BI, it means that the information can be sliced and diced and viewed and interrogated in lots of different ways. So we're working at the moment, we just started a project at the moment working with with HACT, which is the Housing Association Charitable Trust. And they're looking at things much wider than BIM. They're looking at things from a point of view of tenant use, tenant information, and where have we got voids, and how is the tenant's experience being tracked, and how are we looking after that side of things. Maybe the financial profile of what type of buildings are getting, certainly one that I think is going to be increasingly important is infection control. So being able to look at the building from a point of view of how are we going to protect the tenants and the people that are going in it. So that is a way of looking at the building and the spaces in the context of that type of relationship.
So that's been a really useful insight, and I think one thing I'd be quite interested from you, George, is what do you think the top tips are for the residential construction industry?
Well, I think each of the parties has got to look at what information they need and how they should ask for it. So within BIM for Housing Association, within BIM for Housing, we've created 6 discrete working groups. One for development, or consultancy, the advisory group, design, construction, manufacturing, and operations. And the reason we've done that is that each of them has got a different set of stakeholders who need information. And by creating these different working groups, they're able to then state what information is useful to them, and also what the implication is if they don't have it. And they've already started meeting, and they're coming up with some really interesting points. That something where maybe there's a perceived cost saving in one area that actually increases cost and risk to others. So I would say the most important thing is for people to be clear about what information they need and what are they going to do with it. And then once they've done something with it, who do they pass that information on to? It's a matter of looking, because there's a lot of waste in the industry of people generating information that nobody reads.
Agree. So that's a really helpful takeaway for the audience. I think the other takeaway I get is that this is a industry-wide thing. It's every step of the process which needs considering, from the vision to actually the creation and the construction of the site, right through to the maintenance side of things. And we've all got a part to play in actually creating good quality information which we can then pass on and work with effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, one thing I would just add is that one of the housing associations said to me earlier this year, the advent of the new regulator and their requirement for us to ensure that we've ticked all the boxes in terms of safety is quite a challenge, because they're not explicitly saying what is it that you need to check. What they're asking is this building safe? And that means that you don't actually know what information you really need. What you do need to know is looking at perhaps scenarios under these circumstances. What would happen if this particular fire door or the smoke protection systems, if they fail, what's the impact of that? So because of the process, if we can identify what that information is, we're working with fire specialists to try and nail down what it is that's actually really important to them, so that we can make sure it's there.
Well, thank you very much for your time, George. Very appreciate your input and your insights here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, George. We'll be now joining the live Q&A panel at 1 p.m.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to thank the panel for their interviews and presentations that we've all had been watching today, and welcome on to the panel. So today on the panel we have Carl Pallister, and he's from Sapphire. We have Dr. Namita Bassi, sorry I can never pronounce that properly. You have to do it for me in a minute. Andrew Gamblin from Wilmot Dixon. Alistair Lewis from ACG Architects, Sean Farrell, who's representing UK BIM Alliance today, Tristan Parsons, who's again from Sapphire Balconies, and George Stevenson from Active Plan and Chair from BIM for Housing. And we also have our own Nick, who did the interviews over the last few weeks, joining the panel. So thank you guys for all joining us. Again, thank you to everyone that's been watching over the last couple of days, and we're now going to start some of the questions that you've sent in for us. So the first question that I have that's been sent in was, what are the barriers to the technology being taken up when it gets to site? So I wonder if someone would like to volunteer to answer that one for us first.
I'm more than happy to provide an answer on that one.
Thank you, Andy.
That's okay. So site adoption, what I've found is primarily dependent on infrastructure, and infrastructure in two main ways. So one is the internet connection of that site into the cloud. So if there's, for example, then less people are likely to use any kind of digital technology. And the other one is in terms of hardware. So what kind of mobile technology and what kind of mobile hardware people have access to. And obviously the software which runs upon that. So if the software and the technology is not very hardware intensive and requires a medium bandwidth for a site connection, it means that it's got more chance of it being adopted on that site. That's pretty much the major thing that we found.
Okay.
I'll give it a go from a different angle, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
I'd echo what Andrew said, is that we look at you're governed by battery life, access to Wi-Fi, and bandwidth once connected. Battery life is an interesting one because some devices, when used heavily, even is aligning current site practices or construction practices with the expectations of delivery of information. So during the design stages, we're used to seeing updates weekly and fortnightly on progress against design. And there's been a transfer of that expectation to site, where they're expecting to see progress of information weekly, fortnightly, and monthly, whereas traditionally it gets delivered at the end of a sequence or at the end of a package or at the end of the whole project. So I think there's an alignment there around process to which you then need to apply the technology to.
Might just add another little point there, and that is around usability of the technology. I think actually having the technology as being very easy to use, I think helps the adoption as well.
I'd like to contribute on that. Clearly, the point about having the technology and the infrastructure is critical, but there's a more fundamental thing, and that's the process of what information is being gathered, for what purpose, and who benefits from that. So, for example, a lot of the information that we actually need from an asset management perspective is provided by installation contractors. And those installation contractors are principally concerned about getting their particular elements installed and signed off and commissioned. And in many cases, the information that they're gathering doesn't relate directly back to something that's been modelled, because you wouldn't model intermittent strip, for example, or even things like door closers. So the important thing is to, I think, recognise that a lot of the information that is being gathered is related to commercial sign-off, and therefore, although it's data, it needs to be related back in a way that then can be confederated back into the whole data model rather than just the geometric model.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We find ourselves hanging information more off of rooms and spaces than actual objects, especially when you start dealing with the asset manager who doesn't need a model of 30 light fittings. He just needs to know there are 30 light fittings with this type of bulb. It's quite an interesting balance to be struck, and you and I, George, have had many conversations around this.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be captured, though, because that's the most important thing. Often what happens is because it's seen as too hard, it just doesn't happen. And yet the information is typically being captured anyway, in schedules and for sign-off and commissioning anyway. It's just a matter of making sure that that workflow is joined back into the information that's being gathered. So the COBE data, for example, which is the principal handover information, it shouldn't simply be coming from the 3D model. It ought to be a federation of information that's coming from a range of different sources that are being undertaken as part of general practice anyway.
Do you mind, Andrew, if I just build on that question and ask you an additional one further to a point you made in the interview we had about using digital tools and working. One of the examples you used was about positioning and stuff using an iPhone, checking whether there was grab rails on the wall and so on. Does it surely depend on what the benefit is to the people on site as to how well it's actually adopted? Do you find there's different? An example like that can work really well, but there may be a trade working right next to them which don't really feel that they're getting a benefit out on adopting it.
Yeah, you're always going to find that either people adopt your technology in a different way to what you originally thought it was going to be, and they find more value from it, or they adopt it exactly how you have it, and only half the people utilize it. So, for example, the one that I gave where we use some augmented reality on site, both the mechanical and electrical contractor as well as the roofing contractor, interestingly enough, really enjoyed that technology. And the roofing contractor liked it because they could see where the pop-ups were coming through roof. So they could make sure they had the right, elements in place. And in fact, they actually found a couple of situations where there wasn't necessarily a collar in place and a couple of things. So you're always going to find that some people will get more benefit from a technology than others. Typically, what I have seen in the past is that those who have been doing their particular element of work for decades, they have a process in their own mind in terms of how to do it. They understand the information that comes across to them, as long as it comes across in the way they understand it. And they will have a process of working which is quite analog, but works very well for them. Whereas those who've kind of just started out in the last sort of 5-10 years within the construction industry, they are sometimes more receptive to picking up newer technologies and seeing what they can do with it, and seeing other ways of seeing the information, basically. Because a lot of this stuff, particularly from a site side, it's the communication aspect. I appreciate what George and Sean were saying in terms of the data, and that's definitely something that needs to be captured to make sure that the whole BIM and digital process works very well. But a lot of the stuff that turns people off is if the user interface, as Carl was saying, is not great, or that if the way to input information is not user friendly and is not intuitive to understand. So if you could have a situation where there is a technology which only does half of what's required in terms of process, but is incredibly easy to use and is very, very useful for the people on site, that will be adopted a lot better and a lot quicker than the technology that does 100% of everything, but looks like a 1970s database that you need to input stuff into. No one wants to utilize that, and I certainly don't either. So that, yeah, you're always going to find some people adopt it better depending on their trade, depending on what the technology is, and depending on how easy the software is to use.
Thank you. Alistair, did you want to add to the question at all before we move on?
Yeah, and I think it kind of links to both questions in a way. So I was just thinking, in my experience, so as an architect working on a site and trying to implement digital technologies or the advantages of that, I've always tried to approach the contractor and try to find someone within that team who could champion that, on site and be a sort of link. And I think going back to the original question about, the challenges of adopting it, it is about finding the right sort of people to help and support that adoption. And I've had it on a couple of sites where we found someone. They tend to be younger. I don't think that's a prerequisite, but they tend to kind of engage with it in a slightly different way too. Probably because older members of staff have more seniority and are trying to deal with lots of other different things. They don't have the time to possibly learn something new. But I think that process of finding the right people, whether it's in your consultant team or the contractor team, to champion and try and push forward these things. I've always tried to try and experiment with one aspect or one thing on a site to see what benefits you can get from it, rather than trying to do everything. Is actually, let's see if we can just experiment with a couple of little things and see if there are any gains to be made there.
Great, thank you guys. Did anyone else want to add before I move on to the next question?
I'd only add one thing, is just actually ask Andrew the same question. Is that many of the hats I've worn in the past, I have worked on site with a contractor, as a contractor, sorry, not with, as a contractor. Did you ever say, right, there's a line where we stop going digital and we accept the fact it's paper to a point, and then we'll agree that they go out on site with a clipboard, but when they get back to the site hut, they shall put it into a form, rather than forcing digital out into the trench, for want of a better word?
So I guess Wilmot's in a bit of a, I'm not going to say unique, but I'll say a privileged position, in the sense that we utilize digital systems for all our quality sign-offs, as well as health and safety and all that side of things. So this includes everything from permits to work, as well as quality delivery sheets, to ensure that the supply chain have installed things correctly. So all of this stuff is digital already within our organization. But one thing that we are cognizant of when you start bringing the BIM process into things is that there are some trades which will always remain analog, I guess is the easiest way of describing it. So for example, a painter, an interior decorator, does not need to be using a 3D model and inputting information and all this kind of stuff, because a lot of the time they are effectively putting into place something which has already been put in the design within room data sheets and other things. The confirmation comes from the sign-off sheet of the delivery tickets saying that the paint that's been ordered and delivered to site is the same paint, and they've taken a photo on their QD check sheets that says this was the paint that was used in there. So we're cognizant that different trades have different, what do you want to call it, interaction with the digital side of things. And some trades will be a lot more, other trades will be a lot less.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Okay, I'd like to move on to the next question that's been sent in by one of the people that has viewed the videos. This is to Andrew and Alistair about early engagement. As a manufacturer installer, how can we persuade your teams to engage earlier, or their teams to engage earlier? Is it often due to, it's often too late due to process?
So I'll start on that one because it's a big thing that I'm always concerned about. But one of the big issues with BIM, I feel, is the contractual setup, and I think that standard contracts don't allow the the use of other consultants and manufacturers early enough. And a big fan of the integrated project insurance model, where everyone comes together from the outset. But those sort of projects are very, very early in their sort of development. But I do feel it's contractual. I think the only way to get people on board and kind of working together up front is that we look at those contracts and those agreements. The other way of doing it is obviously having an established team that works on a project, and then they can work on future projects as well, one after the other, so that they get to know each other and that they get to know what they're going to be doing on projects. So in my previous role at Hampshire County Council, we would quite typically have a contractor, and we would then use them for a number of projects. And the benefit of that is that you have that continuity, and it tended to form, in terms of specification, standardized ways of producing information. So there's a benefit to that, but I completely understand what you're saying. And as a designer, I would love to get more involvement from manufacturers or subcontractors earlier on, as early as possible, just to help with making sure that everything is coordinated. But it is very difficult in the with current contracts and just current ways of working.
Yeah, basically I'd agree with pretty much everything that Alistair has said there. The current methodologies of working means it's very difficult to get manufacturers involved at a very early stage. There are some organizations and some people testing out different methodologies. So I know within Wilmots, for example, we do have preferred suppliers that we will utilize for certain products. So for example, internal doors, we have a range of, I think, 10 across the UK in terms of suppliers that we will utilize for those particular products, and they have a range of products that we'll use. And that's shown us that there is something that's known as best value, let's put it that way. So a lot of people look for cost. We try to engage with the concept of judging on value. So although the initial capital cost of a product might be slightly higher, the service that the manufacturer brings and the post-installation service, the service during design and construction commissioning is such that they have a better overall value than something which is purely purchased on cost. And I have started to notice that a number of consultants that we work with, as well as some of our customers, they're starting to move their mindset towards that as well. It's a slow shift, and because of the contractual situation, plus the current methodology of working, means it's difficult to do this, but people are starting to move towards best value. So I think over the next maybe 3 or 4 years, manufacturers will see people trying to get in contact with them more often to get more of an involvement at an early stage, particularly if manufacturers are able to offer you want to call it, a hand-holding service to try and look after their products and the details and how it interfaces and how it works. I think a lot of consultants and contractors do like having a manufacturer that can help in that methodology.
I can only add to that one example again. When I was head of BIM for a contractor on a project that was essentially the founding project for the government's platform proposal, building on a platform system. And it was interesting, the fact by bringing a manufacturer on early, we presented them with some of the design challenges from their current product range, and they offered to make a new product to solve that problem because they had a sufficient lead time and there would be sufficient volume. Flip side, it's the end, you're then locked into that solution. So then you have to make sure that you ring fence that area to say that, right, that's resolved, it's being ordered, it's being manufactured, you can't change it because there's a knock-on effect with lead time and commitment to resources. But I thought that was really positive of bringing somebody on early, and it was changing that procurement model of saying, well, let's only do a performance spec and push the problem down the line.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, just adding to that as well. One particular project that I worked on recently was interesting because we actually brought on the mechanical and electrical supply chain member at what was effectively Reba Stage 1 on the project. So very early on, and effectively the agreement we had in place was that the mechanical and electrical supply chain member would effectively employ the consultant that would do the design from Reba Stage 1 all the way through to construction. And by far, that has been the smoothest process I've ever seen on any project in terms of mechanical and electrical design, because there's been no reworking of the models. The consultants used the template the supply chain we utilized, so they had a fabrication standard model effectively from the very beginning, which all of a sudden means that a lot of the reworking that typically happens was gone. The supply chain member understood fully what was going on with the project all the way up to that point, and as soon as responsibility transitioned across to them, they were able to jump straight onto it and proceed pretty much straight into manufacture because they didn't have to do anything. The coordination was done, their model was used, and it was all great. So yeah, it can bringing people on, suppliers, manufacturers, whoever it's going to be, at a very early stage is fantastic for any project if you can do it.
If I could just reinforce that, Alistair mentioned the IPI, the Integrated Project Insurance model, and I was the information lead on that development. And in fact, there's a contract now in place that people can use, which basically moves away from the thing that actually is driving a lot of the problems, and that's lowest price tendering, lowest price procurement. And the point that Andrew's made there, I think, is so valid, and that is that if you can actually look to bring people in based on best value rather than lowest price, then you can bring them much earlier into the process, and you get the benefit of their knowledge. And manufacturers in particular have got a lot to offer there. But what we've got to do is change the mindset that we can save money by lowest price tendering everything right the way down the line. I think there's a lot of benefit to be achieved to, again, what Andrew was saying there, the additional cost that is just often swallowed because, I mean, an M&E contractor was telling me the other day that, in fact, they're a coordination company. They do a lot of coordination for M&E. And they were saying that one of their contractor clients, they'd saved £15,000 by effecting a change, and that it cost them £20,000 in having to update all the models. But the problem was that the procurement people actually made the saving, and therefore they hit their target, but the overall cost of the project was higher. Crazy.
Tristan, it'd be interesting your take on this. I know you're a big advocate of the Mark Farmer modernizer of die and the efficiencies in supply chain. You got any takes on this yourself?
Yes, what I was thinking from our perspective as a subcontractor, to work closely together like this at an early stage does require a high level of trust, and it takes time to kind of build that. It's based on, I guess, I'm quite a believer in the Stephen Covey model of the speed of trust, or where the level of trust goes up, then the speed of the whole process goes up and the cost of the whole process goes down. But it does take time for the market to build trust in yourself. It's based on your credibility and based on following through on what you do. Something from our perspective as a subcontractor is something we pick carefully who we work with, and then try and work very closely with those core set of customers, and trying to have a company to company relationship as opposed to just a project by project relationship, so that we understand what are the drivers for that company, and over time the trust level can build up, and you can start to realize those substantial savings, like others have just been touching on, that there are so many savings there. I mean, we know it from a balcony perspective that if you're in there much earlier on, you can design out a lot of the waste and a lot of the unnecessary costs that aren't achieving anything, and specifically from my perspective, we're not adding any value to the end resident, which that's a really important thing to me. At the end of the day, all these buildings that we're working on are residential buildings that are already being built for the user of the building. And if you have that sort of thing in mind from the start, you can cut out a lot of this waste, but it does take time to build that trust, so you can then speed things up and cut out these unnecessary costs. I don't know if that helps.
Tristan, could I just add to that? That's a really good point. One of the important points that people may not perceive about the IPI model is that there's no PI cover. Yeah. So the individual team members, the individual designers, the individual contractors, they don't have their own individual PI. Now that becomes important in terms of what you just said there in terms of trust, because it means that if something goes wrong, people aren't looking around for one organization to blame. It's the project itself that carries the insurance, and either everybody wins or everybody loses. And that engenders a much higher degree of collaborative working and trust. And it's underpinned by a contract. So you would hope that the contract isn't necessary, but we had to go to a council to get approval, because in many cases people perceived, in particular public sector, they perceived that what they were doing was outside of OJU rules to place a contract based on anything other than lowest price. But putting together a team that is working on the basis of collaborative working right from the beginning actually is legal. So we've actually had the legal case actually sorted. Anyway.
That's very interesting. I need to look into that IPI. I've not come across it before, but I totally agree with what you're saying, that it comes down to a mindset thing and a psychology thing. If we're all in this together and we all stand to share in the benefits, and we can see what's in it for ourselves and it's for the common good, I mean, that's the culture that we try and build within our business, that we're all in something together. But it's not, we make mistakes sometimes, but it's not a case of blaming anybody. We all stand or we fall together. We all share, when things go well, as we embrace the technology and we drive up the productivity, then there should be more profits to share out amongst the staff, and we all benefit in that way. And if everyone's pulling in the same direction and doing it together, it's so much more productive, isn't it, than kind of all trying to cover your own back.
Because then people are not spending their time worrying about who they can transfer risk to. It's a matter of how you can manage risk. So by doing that, it means that you can reduce it, because everybody's focused at trying to do the best job, rather than how can I ensure that I'm not the one that gets blamed when something goes wrong.
That's great, thank you guys. It kind of leads on to another question that we've been sent in, and that is, how can we arrive at the correct balance between giving away our IP secrets versus completely open collaboration? So kind of a trust thing there as well. So would anyone like to lead with that one?
I'm happy to say something on it.
Andrew, you were smiling then, so I thought something was going to come.
I guess, I guess one of the things that's interesting about this is that when people say IP, what do they mean by IP? Number one is what do they mean? Are they talking about the design of the building? Are they talking about the layout of the building? Are they talking about their product itself and how their product goes together, if you're a product manufacturer, for example. To me, I kind of always think to myself about metal decking. If you look at re-entrant metal decking, there's 3 or 4 different manufacturers. The difference between them is minuscule. And the main difference between them is kind of where the bubbles are that's on the profile. Aside from that, they do a fairly similar sort of thing. So they're all basing their product based on something standard, which is load calculations, the physics behind these sorts of things. So when we're talking a digital sense, the way that I like to think of it is the data is kind of similar to, what do you want to call it? Similar to the design calculations, right? The data is data. It is what it is. How you use and process and deal with that data is what gives you your intellectual property and your unique, selling points and all that kind of stuff. So from the point of view of moving forwards, I think people need to reevaluate what they actually mean by intellectual property. Because I can pretty much guarantee that if you gave everyone here who's on this panel the same set of data, you could get 9 different ways that you analyze that data, you look at that data, and 9 different methodologies of working with it to provide some kind of benefit. So what needs to be looked at is kind of like saying to yourself, okay, our IP is how do we work with this information to make ourselves more effective? That's my thoughts on it.
I'll throw in a different one, if you don't mind. Different angle. I'll take my alliance hat off for a second and put on I used to be an architect, a contractor, and a designer, and now I'm an information manager. What I'm seeing is that it's almost linked back to the very early days when we're all on drawing boards. We're saying, in fact, you got paid for producing a drawing. If you produced a second drawing, you got paid again. With the advent, and people used to get bent out of shape when someone else took their drawing, took a copy of it, and then added more information because they thought, well, hang on a second, I should be paid for your secondary use of that information. And it's always that weird one is what should you be paid for? And that's where a lot of the IP comes down to. It's the potential earnings you get from the production of something. We don't really see an end of it. If you're a car manufacturer, you sell the car, that's where or a car salesman, you sold the car, and your sort of return investment is on then coming back for a service or buying a new one next year. The construction industry and designers don't tend to get that. It's that we've done that. Right now we've got to go and find a new client because that's the end of our road. And I think what digital is giving us is, well, is it really the end of the road? Is there, rather than being data dumpers, could we be data custodians? And because we've authored that information, could we help the client look after it through the life of the building? So a way to get involved in operating the OPEX rather than the CAPEX. Or if we're always going to cut ourselves off at CAPEX, well, then we're always going to have this problem of, well, you've used my data to do something I hadn't intended for. I think I should be paid for that. And that comes back to your point, Andrew, data use, which is why people say, I'll give you this data for this specific use. If you use it for anything else, rather than trying to chase the money, they go, I won't be held responsible. That's my non-alliance industry view of where the IP comes from. It's the perceived loss of earnings.
Is it back to the same question which Tristan was talking about, the trust balance? There's a trust from 2 part of that. Providing your solutions is helpful in that handhold you spoke about, Andrew. And likewise, it's about the team not saying, okay, we're just going to drive it down this lowest cost wins approach, which George was talking about. And it's that balance of building trust between the two. It actually ends up with synergy rather than kind of each sort of being a bit protective of themselves in those 2 parties.
Could you ask that again?
Sorry, I probably haven't been too clear, but what I was meaning was if you've got a set of drawings and you give it to a project team and you trust them, you're not going to be worried about them going to your competitor and saying, can you make this exactly like this and just give me a better price than them?
I think you'll find that is what the industry is still worried about, because it still happens. In regions of the world, that does happen.
Yeah.
There are regions of the world where you will pitch for competition, and then a local will win, and it looks remarkably like 5 of the schemes combined. So there is, I think the lack of trust comes from the fact that there's still demonstrations in in the wild that trust can sometimes be unfounded.
So
but we all like to be optimistic. We all like to be optimistic. We go in with an optics point of view that we can trust everybody. Nobody goes in with that, I'm going to go into this project and not trust anybody. Nobody does that, because to do that, you put yourself into an early grave.
Thank you. Nim, did you want to add anything to this point?
Not this
about
one.
Trust?
I mean, trust is multifaceted when you go into the academics of it, and individuals, their perceived trust and actual trust varies. So it's very hard to generalize, and usually, especially from the manufacturer side, if the manufacturer already has experience in working in that sector and has a technical advisory team, usually, and I mean, I can give you an example of steel. There'll be some steel manufacturers, steel suppliers that you trust blindly, and then there's some who you know. So it's kind of, I think it's perceived trust and actual trust. So you might actually perceive a certain level of trust, and there might be in reality an actual level of trust. It's really hard because it's all relative at the end of the day. Trust, one person's trust in another doesn't equate, can't be like duplicated.
I think it's interesting on that point. I think one of the things we'd all agree is that what we're trying to do is deliver the right information to the right person at the right time for the right use. And if you can do those four, people will immediately trust you because you've done for them what they've asked. And therefore, if you regularly do what people ask, they trust you to deliver. And that's that first foundation. And what a lot of the government mandate and the construction strategy was to actually establish that again, is to be able to actually, I think you're right, it's that trust piece, but by making it measurable to say, have you done what was asked at the right point in time, and can you demonstrate it that a machine can read it, and therefore it comes out as ones and zeros and a percentage of compliance, which is a bit naive in some of it, but I think that's the where we're aiming for with, can you trust someone to deliver something? It's by example.
I think the other thing is making sure that they're very clear about what it is that they're supposed to be providing, because all too often the requests are basically documents that then have to be interpreted to, and therefore the person that's actually producing the information isn't quite clear exactly what they're supposed to be producing, and therefore that auditing process, as you said, Sean, is actually really quite difficult to do. So you can't evidence that you've done it. Whereas if, as you say, it can be more structured and transparent, then everybody can gain a bit more confidence because they can see it growing incrementally.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to move on to the next question now. So another question sent in by the audience. So one of the challenges seen with reporting issues is that often this can vary from person to person how this is defined. How can BIM improve this?
Reporting processes, did you say?
Yeah, like reporting issues seen, yes.
So if we're talking in terms of quality of workmanship issues, then BIM can help quite significantly. The fact that the 3D models should be your design models, they should be accurately reflecting what the design of the major elements should be on site, means that very quickly and very easily you can use something like augmented reality on site to get an understanding of how whether something has been installed and is it in the approximate location of where it needs to be. So you can use it that way. If we're talking in terms of finishes, you could use high quality visuals and renders, basically put up on a quality board within a room to give people an understanding of what the room should look like in its final state. That works quite well. If we're talking reporting from the point of view of health and safety, or something similar to that, then I don't really know how BIM can really help with that side of things. Whilst it can obviously embed the design risks, for example, and CDM requirements within it, it's very difficult. Well, you wouldn't typically draw in, for example, the handrail, the temporary handrail that's required around a void, for example. That's something which is dealt with on site and through other means and other methodologies, like through a scaffolding thing. So, and plus, how would you couldn't utilize BIM to identify when someone's working in an unsafe manner, for example. You might be able to showcase that there is a difference in logistics or sequencing that someone's employing or utilizing, but yeah, primarily it would be from a quality point of view and workmanship point of view. You can utilize BIM for doing that.
Thank you. Carl, would you like to add to this one?
I think what Andrew said is good. It's good to. I think it is primarily the quality side that is covered. So it's about planning how the whole sequence of works goes ahead, and then about actually making sure that sequence of work follows. Embedding checklists. I think Andrew spoke about QD forms. Embedding checklists within the whole process helps, because that checklist, especially if it's linked with payment of the subcontractor, for example, that they don't get paid until they, until they've submitted the forms. That helps as well. It helps focus the minds. They've got to get that checklist done to be able to, and it's got to be signed off before they get paid. That helps. That then helps to embed it, because it becomes part of the day-to-day work. I don't know if that helps at all.
I think there is some really good work that's actually evolving around the whole health and safety and side of things. So although you're quite right that quality checks are probably the principal thing that people are using it for, if you look at people like 3D Repo, they're doing work with the health and safety executive, and they've actually built an application that works around their platform. And what that's doing is allowing you to alert yourself to the sorts of health and safety risks that are taking place. There's also the 4D group, where people like Freeform are using the model to actually simulate where the potential risks are. And I think the other point that Andrew touched on, which is procedures, having the right type of not just checks, but also instruction procedures that can alert the person that's actually carrying out a piece of work as to what they ought to be doing to ensure that they're doing so in both a quality basis and a safe basis are part of that. So in the BIM for Housing group that we're developing now, we've actually got feed-in from the BIM for Health and Safety group. So this is part of the UK BIM Alliance, different working groups who are specialising in different areas, feeding that information together. So if we can tie back maybe a procedure back to a system or an asset type that's going in, then it means that you're then able to join together both the quality side of things, but also the safety and the risk mitigation.
Thank you very much.
I'll only add in, because we just completed 3 months of research on it. We looked at reporting, auditing, and the tracking of information through processes. And what came out of it was quite interesting. So going back to the reporting part, is if you use a dashboard or a red or a traffic light system, what does that mean? So if you look at a checklist, you go to a site, you've got a punch list, and you've ticked it. Now, trust says the person's actually done what it said those tick list is done. What we say is that when you've ticked that box, should that box only be tickable by the byproduct of doing something else, i.e. you get a cascade, which says at the lowest common denominator, I call it reporting by doing. So at what point does you have to say, right, a machine can't help me with that. A human being's got to go and look, assess it and go, yes. And then the moment you've said yes to that, it cascades up in your reporting to go, this person has said, yes, I trust this person. Therefore, that 1% of my report is correct. Yeah. And if you've got 100 people reporting, all give 1% each. But the thing we looked at with the processes is, well, what do you want to know that moves your needle forward, as we call it? what's important to you. So when we look at commercials, there's usually 3 things a commercial director will want to know, which gives him 3 green lights. Is it, are we being paid? Are we under contract? And is the client happy? Now, the are we being paid one is easy, but if you're not, then you'd have to go and look through all the checklists to say, why aren't we being paid? And then is it a checklist or is it a communication thread where you've got to go that way? So it's really interesting to actually look at, when you're doing reporting, what does yes mean and what does no mean? And also being fair. Because I often remember, if you're looking at, let's pick the obvious one, clash detection. People will say, you've got 30,000 problems in this model. And people go, what? You go, yeah, but there are 3 million objects in this model, of which 30,000 have a problem. To be fair, that's a 1% problem. And yet you only report the 30,000. So as I always say, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. There's a real balance in doing fair and honest and transparent reporting. And it's a skill, to tell you the truth. It is an art to actually do it, but a lot of it is sitting down with your client and saying, or whoever is receiving your report, what is it you'd want to know? And how do I need to demonstrate that I've measured it, that I know that value is correct? It's really interesting. I find it fascinating to do that sort of process mapping, to see where trust sits and where demonstrable evidence sits.
Yeah, evidence basing is actually very important. Actually having some evidence that you can pin on. So it's not just somebody ticking a box and that's it. No, take a photo. Put in a measurement. Now that measurement in itself is a piece of data that someone else can use. So it's about connecting up all these different data silos and making something of it, which is exactly what George has been helping us with.
Thank you very much. We do have another question now, on a slightly different tangent kind of thing. So it was mentioned, Nim, in your presentation about sustainability. We've been asked what the benefits of BIM are in helping sustainability. Obviously, it's something that's quite a topic for a lot of people. Nim, could you want to start with that one?
So again, because it gives you higher access to data, it makes sustainability a lot easier to achieve. So that's one of the perceived benefits of BIM and sustainability. But BIM's primarily being still only used on certain projects. It's not used in as much. I mean, people are adopting it. So residential construction, it's being adopted. But equally, I think because of the access to large pools of data, you can achieve sustainability faster, and more councils and more the government's driving that. So it'll kind of together help you reach your sustainability goals, because it's not sustainability is like an immediate action that needs to be kind of delivered in construction, because construction by its very nature uses a lot of resources. It's very, very inefficient. So if you look at it in a way, most people who, if you look at the end user, a house that they buy will be the most expensive purchase that they make in their entire lifetime, majority of the people. But especially if you buy a new home or a home, there's such little access to data and accountability. So, I mean, Nick and I have spoken about this before. So there is as a user, you're pretty much in the hands of your house builder. So there have been instances where entire estates have not had cavity barriers, etc. So there is sort of an ethical kind of responsibility as well from a user point of view to kind of adopt BIM. So we not only from sustainability point of view, so there's greater accountability from a user point of view. So you can actually, I think BIM offers this holistic solution to solve all these problems that construction is facing, like inefficiency, unproductive systems, lack of data, all of that. If even the residential construction were to adopt it, I think the entire sector could become a lot more efficient, and actually probably profitability would increase. Whereas I think BIM at this point in time is seen as a huge adoption cost, and there's a huge barrier. And I think as an industry, people kind of need to think, how can we adopt other models? So one of the key things for the technology acceptance model in retail was they incentivize the use of e-commerce by incentivizing the user to buy online rather than offline. And how can you incentivize people in the construction sector to adopt BIM so you can have all these desired outcomes of sustainability, accountability, better better project delivery, etc. Sorry.
I think I'd like to add to that as well, that we're doing a lot of work at the moment where, as a, I suppose a medium-sized architectural practice, we've been going on a BIM journey. That's probably not the right term, but we've been doing that for the last 3 years, and we've developing our skills, doing a lot more collaboration, getting our BIM processes in place, common data environment. There's lots of things that we've been doing which have kind of moved us forward in that respect in terms of our technology. And we've got to a point now, and we're all aware of the sort of the climate emergency that's evolved over the last 18 months or so, that sustainability is much higher on our agenda, and actually we have the tools or access to the tools now to help us and support us make good decisions early on. And I think previously we just didn't have the access to that because we were working in quite traditional or analog ways. So now we have a whole process where we are experimenting with different softwares that are out there to help us make good decisions and at those early stages, because as designers, we make so many decisions up front which can affect how a building performs later on. And once those decisions are embedded, it's very hard to get out of them. So having good tools to assess and look at those is quite important. But we are struggling to find a tool that will do everything for us. That's what we'd like, but it just isn't available. So we're having to use a number of different tools, and then you get into kind of inefficiencies of your workflow and how you manage jumping between programs, or whether we have the right skills and the right people, and how long it might take to utilize them. So it's not necessarily an answer, but it's just a kind of demonstration of where we are, and that we are looking at that quite heavily and quite specifically to see how we change our workflows and utilize technology to support that. And BIM has enabled us to do that, I think, to a greater extent.
I'll just jump on the back of that with my Alliance hat on. I'm taking the hats on and off today. People will have seen the interoperability report that went out to address exactly that problem. And I know from putting my bureau hat on as engineers, I think the last count, we deploy 600 different platforms across the practice. It's about 600 in total. When you look at our software center, the applications that are available for you to install hits around about the 600 mark. To operate as a business, not just as designers. And we had to look at the interoperability side. So we built our own method of interop to solve that problem. And then we gave it away 2 years ago into the public domain for people to develop on GitHub. Because we realized we had to address it, because as you said, we were on this similar journey, and we realized that, we started in 2012 after a couple of years, that there's no way we can do this without solving the interop problem. So we went ahead and did it and solved it for ourselves. And we're regularly revisiting it every day. As a new tool comes out or something gets discovered, we do the interop. Maybe to be a little bit controversial is to say that I know everybody talks about BIM, but BIM doesn't have to include 3D geometry. If we actually talk about, information management and data, to what Andrew was saying earlier, a punch list is still part of BIM. A QA checklist or a non-compliance report is still part of a digital process, but we don't call it BIM. People just go, well, that's just online forms. Yes, it's part of a digital process. So we run the risk of thinking BIM is 3D geometry. We should think about the ISO and the bigger picture of information management across all information types. And sustainability one is a really interesting one. I'll just finish on it. It's a colleague of mine, Alan Waha's, worked in Formula One and boat racing. And what I'd like to see us do as an industry is, in those two industries, they build a digital version in the computer, they run their tests, they run their analysis. Then they build a scale model and run it in a wind tunnel and in a fish tank. If that doesn't match the digital model, they update the two until they do. And then they build a full scale model and take it out on the track and on the river, censor it up. And if the real world doesn't match the fish tank or the digital model, they work it out until they do. And I don't think we've, to what you were saying, Alistair, is we don't get that opportunity in the construction sector, because it takes us 7 years or 6 years to get from initial brief to the end of post-occupancy evaluation. Whereas in the car world and the boat world, they're 15, 16 weeks. So their clock cycle is that much faster. It takes us about 6 or 7 years to learn. And that's why I think the idea of transparency and open shared data, so that if another practice down the road is doing a similar building, it's been running for 3 years, why can't that information be shared for everyone to learn from and build better? And I think that's a good, again, to that IP question earlier, it's an interesting one that, well, we could all benefit from sharing the piece of information that makes us better designers. It's nothing to do with competitive advantage. You buy the designer you have trust in and you like their work.
Yeah, and the
contractors.
Yeah, DFMA is going to make a big difference. That's more analogous with, I think, what you're saying there about motor racing and etc. You know, if we've got DFMA, design for manufacturing and assembly, then you've got the opportunity to select materials and make sure that each of them are sustainable in their own right. But then you've got the opportunity to recover the cost of all that investment on a number of products.
But you need to stick with that building, which is what we don't do at the moment. So I was saying earlier about, you know, the opportunity to say, right, we're finished. We'd like to, how about we incentivize our fees? We'll reduce 5% off our fees if you allow us to fully monitor the building for 3 years so we can learn what it's doing.
Yeah.
There is a shift towards that. But I'm seeing a lot more of a shift towards the, I think we call it performance gap. So effectively the design versus the actual. There are a lot of manufacturers that I know of that want to get involved to work that out from a performance gap perspective. From a sustainability perspective, I do know that embodied carbon figures is something that's massive and is coming through a lot of manufacturers at the moment. The difficulty is how, when, and where you track the embodied carbon. Because the thing is, a lot of the time at the moment, it's tracked from factory to site gate. In terms of, you know, or when it leaves the factory to when it arrives at the site gate, which in the life cycle of, say, for example, a steel beam or a steel column, you know, the embodied carbon, if anything, should be from mine all the way through to the end process. But then that raises another query, which is if you have something which is recycled content, 100% recycled content, a beam that's been recycled 15 times has a higher embodied carbon content than a beam which is fresh out the ground, from what I understand. So you've got this weird situation going on where what do you check and how do you check it? But I think with there's a shift, particularly in the residential sector now, towards net zero carbon buildings. I think it's for the 2030, or something around there, 2025, 2030. The people are starting to shift towards net zero carbon properties and houses for people to live in, which means that the performance gap has to be sorted out. And number two, accurate reporting of embodied carbon has to be sorted out as well. So again, over the next 5 to 10 years, I can definitely see there's going to be a lot of, if not manufacturers leading it, then at least contractors and forward-thinking customers, which will probably be local authorities or possibly housing associations, that will turn around and say, we want this and we want it accurately done, go and find it. And then it's up to the industry to find a way to sort it out. But yeah, interoperability is the big problem with all of it. I mean, there is software out there that can get you the design of the building, other software that will give you some life cycle analysis of the building in both an energy and embodied carbon point of view. But they're not synonymous, they don't talk to each other enough. Ideally, what you'd want is to be able to draw in a wall, and as you draw in the wall, all the life cycle analysis information updates itself immediately as soon as you finish drawing it in. That's, you know, a utopia BIM scenario in my world, is that as soon as you draw it, all the various aspects are taken into account, and that's it. You have the information live in front of you.
Thank you very much.
One of the things which is coming up at the moment at the Grenfell inquiry is the correlation between the ambitious sustainability figures and the choice, the poor choice of insulation, which obviously contributed to fire load. And it's this kind of analysing it in paper versus analysing it digitally. The question was asked about sustainability, yes, but the fact is that there is correlations between these different ones, and you might be offsetting your performance in another area. It might be rigidity instead of your thermal performance, or it might be your fire performance instead of thermal. But it's the link between these. And I know, George, you said, you talked in the interview about the interrogation of data, is that it's drawing the conclusions and the insights from it, which is one of the important roles, isn't it, really?
Yes, most certainly. Being able to look at it from an organisational perspective rather than just a technical perspective and what the impact of that is. I think if we can take the data and we can read it in all sorts of different ways, that becomes more consumable for people.
Thank you very much, everyone. We are going to have to start drawing to a close now. Cover some really interesting topics. I was just wondering if the panel would mind just giving a quick closing statement. One thing that you'd like everyone to take away from today about BIM. So no particular order, I'm just going to go around you on the screen that I can see you on. So Nick, if you'd like to give your one first.
I think one of the key points I'd take away from it really is that engagement being based on the realistic need for digital integrations on, like we spoke about the decorator, quite important. Collaboration based on trust. And the third thing for me is really that the being able to understand the link between bits of data rather than just capturing stuff at the point of capturing and not actually doing anything with it.
Thank you. And Andrew?
I guess the one thing to take away for me is that BIM isn't scary. It's made to feel scary because of the language sometimes is used and the acronyms and stuff, but it's really not. It's all about basically communication, transparency, and making sure that you're talking to all parts of the construction process and making sure that everyone's involved. So get involved, basically.
Thank you. Cole?
Yeah, so I don't know. I think there's some interesting takeaways here. I think as an industry, we need to be prepared to extend trust a lot more and work on the trust in between the different entities. Because until we crack that problem, really, there's nothing else that will fit together. There's bound to be ways of getting that achieved, and I think what George is doing in his work is really helping. I think as an industry, we're starting to come round to the idea that we've got to work together collaboratively. I think anything that we can do to try and improve that and move that forward faster, I think would help. And just being prepared to share information.
Thank you. George?
Yeah, I actually concur with what's been said earlier, and that is that the information is the most important thing. One of the barriers that we find is that a lot of the people that have got the real knowledge and the real contribution to make, because they're not directly involved in something that appears to be a 3D model, they don't consider themselves to be part of the BIM process. Whereas, as Andrew and Sean said earlier, they're the ones that are actually providing a lot of the real valuable information, and therefore we need to make sure that they understand that they are very much part of the BIM process. It's just that they're not modelling in 3D.
Thank you, George. And Alistair?
Okay, so I've just shared in the chat actually just a link. I think someone was asking about a report I mentioned in the video I spoke in, and it's the PricewaterhouseCoopers BIM Benefits Methodology Report. And I would say if anyone's got any questions about the value of BIM, I think that's a really good place to start to help, particularly supporting clients with the decision-making process to show that the value it can bring in a quantifiable way. I think we do have quite a lot of discussions about how we can prove things, and essentially that report goes a long way to start to demonstrate the value that the BIM Level 2 agenda did bring to those particular projects. I think that's my main takeaway is it's about engaging with clients as much as possible and supporting them with good information to help them on this route that we're taking, and greater digitization within the construction industry.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Tristan, would you like to share your takeaway?
I was thinking of the matter of win-win, that when we're in it together, to win together, it succeeds. I thought it was quite a good point that Nim made earlier about incentivizing the use of technology, because we need to understand what's in it for us and how we can mutually benefit from things to increase adoption. And just harking back to the point about IP and intellectual property, I would say that intellectual property is a big incentive because we can have intellectual property and have that uniqueness. That's a big incentive to us to innovate. And if it wasn't for the intellectual property benefits, Sapphire would never have innovated balconies to where we have today. So we may focus on the kind of negative side of intellectual property, but it's actually a big incentive, and therefore it's a win-win in the long run because we win by generating IP, and that enables us, puts us in a stronger position to benefit others by contributing more back.
Thank you, Tristan. And Nim, would you like to share your takeaway?
For me, it's more, I think, on industry level, I think one of the things that industry is not, especially construction industry, is probably not that good with is setting up like knowledge transfer partnerships, maybe with like, especially when it comes to adopting new technologies, perhaps people need to consider whether they should be partnering with like academics or universities, because it's quite common in operations and, supply chain management where when industries have issues, they kind of partner. So they bring in academics along with like practice to kind of solve this issue. So it seems that there's large pools of data as well. Again, data is meaningless unless you kind of use it to your benefit. So maybe there's kind of a need for more like collaboration, not just among the industry, but maybe bringing in some, academics or, knowledge transfer partnerships to kind of help the ease of adoption and kind of derive the value that digital adoption brings. I think that's something that as on a practice level or a manufacturer level, people should definitely look into because I've seen really good benefits on at least supply chain and manufacture side where people have partnered with universities, and universities are quite keen to do this because they have so many academics who need access to data for like their thesis or their projects. So they're quite happy to partner with you, but equally you get meaningful insights to better inform your process of actually digital transformation.
Thank you very much, Nick. And Sean.
Just to mute myself. I'd echo what Dr. Marisa said there. We're working with universities as well. We found it very beneficial. And obviously the CDBB are an academic institution partner with industry, and look how successful that has been. So, and the Alliance work with industry. And what the main takeaway I would like to offer to people, and the thing that I think I've seen, again, demonstrated through things that everyone said, is that this whole thing is made up of people and culture, processes and tools. People tend to get the weighting mixed up. So in my experience, your digital transformation or your route to leveraging the benefits of BIM and IM is the fact it's 10% the tool you pick, 20% the process you wrap around it, and 70% culture and people. No matter what you do, you need, and people spend too much time and effort on not that you shouldn't, on the process and tool side of it, and not addressing the culture, and then wondering why things aren't moving on when you do really need to engage with people. And as Alice just said, talk with your clients, talk with your fellow colleagues, talk with the rest of industry, understand what they're doing, and then let's move the culture forward, and then the processes and tools will underpin that.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and also for all of your presentations. We do have an access on our website, so if you do go on there and want to view the event again, or if you want to share it with anyone, just get them to go onto the ResiBuild website and they can actually request to join that. We do have a poll in progress at the moment as well. We greatly value your feedback, helps us with our events and what we need to be doing to make them even bigger and better. So yes, I'd like to thank the panel again for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and some really interesting content's come from that. And to everyone that's been viewing over the last few days, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, panel.
Thanks very much.